it's time to sit back and relax with your favorite drink. And listen. Good evening, my dear friends, and welcome back once more to the hour where shadows grow long and old voices begin to stir. Tonight I'll be guiding you away from the comforts of the present and back into a time when darkness felt closer, heavier, when fear crept in by firelight and lingered in every quiet corner. So settle in, let the outside world fall away, and listen closely. These stories are born in the earlier years of horror itself, shaped by superstition, dread, and the slow burn of the unknown. They've endured because they still remember how to frighten us. If you're ready to step into those lingering nightmares, then we may begin. The Soul Snatcher by Tom Curry. The shrill voice of a woman broke the steady hum of the many machines in the great, semi-darkened laboratory. It was the onslaught of weak femininity against the ebony shadow of Jared, the silent servant of Professor Ramsay Burr. Not many people were able to get to the famous man against his wishes, as Jared obeyed orders implicitly and was generally an efficient barrier. "I will see him. I will," screamed the middle-aged woman. "I'm Mrs. Mary Baker, and it's his fault my son's gonna die. His fault. But Professor Burr." And Jared was unable to keep her quiet. Coming in from the sunlight, her eyes were not yet accustomed to the strange, subdued haze of the laboratory, an immense chamber crammed full of equipment, the vista of which seemed like an apartment in hell. Bizarre shapes stood out from the mass of impedimenta. Great stills which rose 2 full stories in height, dynamos, immense tubes of coloured liquids, 100 puzzles to the inexpert eye. The small, plump figure of Mrs. Baker was very out of place in this setting. Her voice was poignant, reedy. A look at her made it evident that she was a conventional, good woman. She had soft, cloudy golden eyes and a pathetic mouth, and she seemed on the point of tears. Madam, the doctor is busy," whispered Jared, endeavouring to shoo her out of the laboratory with his polite hands. He was respectful, but firm. She refused to obey. She stopped when she was within a few feet of the activity in the laboratory, and stared with fear and horror at the centre of the room, and its occupant, Professor Burr, whom she had addressed during her flurried entrance. The professor's face, as he peered at her, seemed like a disembodied stare, for she could only see eyes behind a mask of lavender-grey glass eye-holes, with its flapping ends of dirty, grey-white cloth. She drew in a deep breath and gasped, for the pungent fumes, acrid and penetrating, of sulphuric and nitric acids, stabbed at her lungs. It was like the breath of hell, and aptly Professor Burr seemed like the devil himself, manipulating these infernal machines. Acting swiftly, the tall figure stepped over and threw 2 switches in a single, sweeping movement. The vermilion light, which had lived in a long row of tubes on a nearby bench, abruptly ceased to writhe like so many tongues of flame, and the embers of hell died out. Then the professor flooded the room in harsh grey-green light, and stopped the high-pitched humming whine of his dynamos. A shadow picture writhing on the wall, projected from a lead-glass barrel, disappeared suddenly. The great colour filters and other machines lost their semblance of horrible life, and a regretful sigh seemed to come from the metal creatures as they gave up the ghost. To the woman, it had been like entering the abode of fear. She couldn't restrain her shudders, but she bravely confronted the tall figure of Professor Burr as he came forth to greet her. He was extremely tall, with a red, bony mask of a face pointed at the chin by a sharp little goatee. Feathery blonde hair, silvered and awry, covering his great head. "Madam," said Burr in a gentle, disarmingly quiet voice, "your manner of entrance might have cost you your life. Luckily I was able to deflect the rays from your person, or else you might not now be able to voice your complaint, for such seems to be your purpose in coming here." He turned to Jared, who was standing close by. "Very well, Jared, you may go. After this, it will be as well to throw the bolts, although in this case I am quite willing to see the visitor." Jared slid away then, leaving the plump little woman to confront the famous scientist. For a moment, Mrs. Baker stared into the pale grey eyes, the pupils of which seemed black as coal by contrast. Some, his bitter enemies among them, claimed that Professor Ramsay Burr looked cold and bleak as an iceberg, others saying that he had a baleful glare, while his mouth was grim and determined. Yet, through her eyes, Mrs. Baker, looking at the professor's bony mask of a face, with that high-bridged, intrepid nose, those passionless grey eyes, thought that Ramsay Burr would be handsome, if a little less cadaverous and more human. "The experiment which you ruined by your untimely entrance," continued the professor, "was not a safe one." His long white hand waved toward the bunched apparatus, but to her the room seemed all glittering metal coils of snake-like wire, ruddy copper, dull lead, and tubes of all shapes. Hell cauldrons of unknown chemicals seethed and slowly bubbled. Beetle-black baker-like fixtures reflected the hideous light. "Oh," she cried, clasping her hands as though she addressed him in prayer. "Forget your science, Professor Burr. Be a man. Help me. 3 days from now, my boy, my son, whom I love above all else in the world, is going to die." 3 days is a long time," said the professor calmly. "Do not lose hope. I have no intention of allowing your son, Alan Baker, to pay the price for a deed of mine, and I freely confess it was I who was responsible for the death of— what was the person's name? Smith, I believe. It was you who made Alan get poor Mr. Smith to agree to the experiments which killed him, and which the world blamed on my son," she said. "They called it the deed of a scientific fiend, Professor Burr. Perhaps they're right, but Alan's innocent." "Be quiet," ordered Burr, raising his hand. "Remember, madam, your son Alan is only a commonplace medical man, and while I taught him a little from my vast store of knowledge, he was ignorant and of much less value to science and humanity than myself. Do you not understand? Can you not comprehend also that the man Smith was a martyr to science? He was no loss to mankind, and only sentimentalists could have blamed anyone for his death. Well, I should have succeeded in the interchange of atoms which we were working on, and Smith would at this moment be hailed as the first man to travel through space in invisible form, projected on radio waves, had it not been for the fact that the alloy which conducts the 3 types of sinusoidal failed me and burned out. Yes, it was an error in calculation, and Smith would now be called the Lindbergh of the atom but for that. Yet Smith has not died in vain, for I have finally corrected this error. Science is but trial and correction of error, and all will be well." Alan must not die at all," she cried. "For weeks he's been in that death house. Oh, it's killing me. The governor refuses him a pardon, nor will he commute my son's sentence. In 3 days he's to die in the electric chair, for a crime which you admit you alone are responsible for. And yet you remain in your laboratory, immersed in your experiments, and do nothing. The tears came now, and she sobbed hysterically. It seemed that she was making an appeal to someone in whom she'd only a forlorn hope. "Nothing," repeated Burr, pursing his thin lips. "Nothing. Madam, I have done everything. I have, as I've told you, perfected the experiment. It's successful. Your son has not suffered in vain, and Smith's name will go down with the rest of science's martyrs as one who died for the sake of humanity. But if you wish to save your son, you must be calm. You must listen to what I have to say, and you must not fail to carry out my instructions to the letter. I'm ready now." And with that light, the light of hope, sprang in the mother's eyes. She grasped his arm and stared at him with shining face through through tear-dipped eyelashes. Do you mean it? Can you save him? Even after the governor has refused me? What can you do? No influence will snatch Alan from the jaws of the law. The public's greatly excited and very hostile toward him. A quiet smile played at the corners of Burr's thin lips. Come, he said. Place this coat about you. Alan wore it when he assisted me. The professor replaced his own mask and conducted the woman into the interior of the laboratory. I will show you, said Professor Burr. And she saw before her now, on long metal shelves which appeared to be delicately poised on fine scales whose balance was registered by hairline indicators, 2 small metal cages. Professor Burr stepped over to a row of common cages set along the wall. There was a small menagerie there, guinea pigs, the martyrs of the animal kingdom, rabbits, monkeys, and some cats. The man of science reached in and dragged out a meowing cat, placing it in the right-hand cage on the strange table. He then obtained a small monkey and put this animal in the left-hand cage, beside the cat. The cat, on the right, squatted on its haunches, meowing and looking up at its tormentor. The monkey, after a quick look around, began to investigate the upper reaches of its new cage. Over each of the animals was suspended a fine, curious metallic armament. For several minutes, while the woman, puzzled at how this demonstration was to affect the rescue of her condemned son, waited impatiently, the professor deftly worked at the apparatus, connecting wires here and there. Right, I am ready now, said Burr. Watch the 2 animals carefully. Yes, she replied faintly, for she was quite afraid. The great scientist was stooping over, looking at the balances of the indicators through microscopes. She saw him reach for his switches, and then a brusque order caused her to turn her eyes back to the animals. The cat in the right-hand cage, the monkey at the left. Both animals screamed in fear, and a sympathetic chorus sounded from the menagerie, as a long, purple spark danced from one grey metal pole to the other, over the cages on the table. At first, Mrs. Baker noticed no change. The spark had died. The professor's voice, unhurried, grave, broke the silence. The first part of the experiment is over, he said. The ego... Oh, my God, cried the woman. You've driven the poor creatures mad. She indicated to the cat. That animal was clawing at the top bars of its cage, uttering a bizarre chattering sound, somewhat like a monkey. The cat hung from the bars, swinging itself back and forth as if on a trapeze, and then reached up and hung by its hind claws. As for the monkey, it was squatting on the floor of its cage, and it made a strange sound in its throat, almost a meow, as it hissed several times at the professor. Oh, they are not mad, said Burr. As I was explaining to you, I finished the first portion of the experiment. The ego, the personality of one animal, has been taken out and put into the other. She was unable to speak. Well, he had mentioned madness. Was he, Professor Ramsay Burr, crazy? And it was likely enough, and yet the whole thing, in these surroundings, did seem plausible. She hesitated about speaking, watching with fascinated eyes the out-of-character behavior of the 2 beasts. Burr went on. The second part follows at once. Now that the 2 egos have interchanged, I will shift the bodies. And when it's completed, the monkey will have taken the place of the cat, and vice versa. Now, watch. He was busy for some time with his levers, and the smell of ozone reached Mrs. Baker's nostrils as she stared with horrified eyes at the animals. She then blinked. The sparks crackled madly, the monkey meowed, and the cat chattered. Were her eyes going back on her? She could now see neither animal distinctly. They seemed to be shaking in some cosmic disturbance, and were merely blurs, Well, this illusion, for to her it seemed it must be optical, just persisted, or grew worse, until the quaking forms of the two unfortunate creatures were like so much ectoplasm in swift motion, ghosts whirling about in a dark room. Yes, she could see the cages quite distinctly, and the table and even the indicators of the scales. She closed her eyes for a moment. The acrid odors penetrated to her lungs, and she coughed, opening her eyes. Now, she could see clearly again. Yes, she could see a monkey, and it was climbing, quite naturally, about its cage. It was excited, but just a monkey. And the cat, while protesting mightily, did act like a cat. And then she gasped. Had her mind in the excitement betrayed her? She looked at Professor Burr. On his lean face there was a smile of triumph, and he seemed to be awaiting her applause. She looked again at the two cages. Surely at first the cat had been in the right-hand cage, and the monkey in the left, but now the monkey was in the place where the cat had been, and the cat had been shifted to the left-hand cage. And so it was with Smith, when the alloys burned out, said Burr. It is impossible to extract the ego or dissolve the atoms and translate them into radio waves unless there's a connection with some other ego and body. For in such a case, the translated soul and body would have no place to go. Well, luckily for you, madam, it was the man Smith who was killed when the alloys failed me. It might have been Alan, for he was the second pole of the connection. But she began faintly. How can this mad experiment have anything to do with saving my boy? He waved impatiently at her evident stupidity. Do you not understand? It is so I will save Alan, your son. I shall switch our egos, or souls, as you say, and then switch the bodies. You must always take this sequence. Why, I have not ascertained, but it always works like this. Mrs. Baker was terrified. What she had just seen smacked of the blackest magic. Yet a woman in her position must grasp at straws. The world was blaming her son for the murder of Smith, a man Professor Burr had made use of as he might a guinea pig, and Alan must be snatched from the death house. Do you mean you can bring Alan from the prison to here, just by throwing those switches? She asked. That's it. But there is more to it than that, for it is not magic, madam. It is science, you understand, and there must be some physical connection. But with your help, that can easily be done. Professor Ramsay Burr, she knew, was the greatest electrical engineer the world had ever known, and he stood high as a physicist. Nothing hindered him in the pursuit of knowledge, they said. He knew no fear, and he lived on an intellectual mountaintop. He was so great that he almost lost sight of himself. To such a man, nothing was impossible. So hope, wild hope, sprang in Mary Baker's heart, and she grasped the bony hand of the professor and kissed it. "Oh, I believe you," she cried. "You can do it. You can save Alan. I'll do anything you tell me to do." "Very well. You visit your son daily at the death house, do you not?" She nodded, a shiver of remembrance of that dread spot passing through her. "Then you will tell him the plan and let him agree to see me the night preceding the electrocution. I'll give him final instructions as to the exchange of bodies. Then my life spirit, or ego, is confined in your son's body in the death house, and Alan will be able to perform the feat of changing the bodies, and your son's flesh will join his soul, which will have been temporarily inhabiting my own shell. Do you see? When they find me in the cell where they suppose your son to be, they'll be unable to explain the phenomenon. They can do nothing but release me. Your son will go here, and can be whisked away to a safe place of concealment." Yes, what am I supposed to do besides this?" Professor Burr opened a drawer nearby, and from it extracted a folded garment of thin, shiny material. "This is metal cloth coated with the new alloy," he said. He rummaged further, saying as he did so, "I expected you'd be here to see me, and I've been getting ready for your visit. All is prepared, save a few odds and ends which I can easily clean up in the next 2 days. Here are 4 cups which Alan must place under each leg of his bed, and this delicate little director coil you must be especially careful with. It is to be slipped under your son's tongue at the time appointed." She was staring at him, still half in fear, half in wonder, yet she couldn't feel any doubt of the man's miraculous powers. Somehow, while he talked to her and rested those cold eyes upon her, she was under the spell of the great scientist. Her son, before the trouble into which she had been dragged by the professor, had often hinted at the abilities of Ramsay Burr, giving her the idea that his employer was practically a necromancer, yet a magician whose advanced scientific knowledge was correct and explainable in the light of reason. Yes, Alan had talked to her often when he was at home, resting from his labours with Professor Burr. He'd spoken of the new electricity discovered by the famous man, and also told his mother that Burr had found a method of separating atoms and then transforming them into a form of radioelectricity so they could be sent in radio waves to designated points. And she now remembered. The swift trial and conviction of Alan on the charge of murder had occupied her so deeply that she'd forgotten all else for the time being. That her son had informed her quite seriously that Professor Ramsay Burr would soon be able to transport human beings by radio. "Neither of us will be injured in any way by the change," said Burr calmly. "It is possible for me now to break up human flesh, send the atoms by radioelectricity, and reassemble them in their proper form by these special transformers and atom filters." Mrs. Baker took all the apparatus presented to her by the professor. She ventured the thought that it might be better to perform the experiment at once, instead of waiting until the last minute. But this Professor Burr waved aside as impossible. He needed the extra time, he said, and there was no hurry. She glanced around the room, and her eyes took in the giant switches of copper with their black handles. There were others of a grey-green metal she didn't recognize. Many dials and meters, strange to her, all confronting the little woman. These things, she felt with a rush of gratitude toward the inanimate objects, were those that would help to save her son. So they interested her, and she began to feel kindly towards these great machines. Would Professor Burr really be able to save Alan, as he claimed? Yes, she thought, he could. She would make Alan consent to the trial of it, even though her son had cursed the scientist and cried he would never speak to Ramsay Burr again. She was escorted from the home of the professor by Jared, and, going out into the bright, sunlit streets, she blinked her eyes as they adjusted themselves to the daylight after the strange light of the laboratory. In a bundle she had a strange suit and the cups. Her purse held the tiny coil, wrapped in cotton for safety. How could she get the authorities to consent to her son having the suit? The cups and the coil she might slip to him herself. Oh, she decided that her mother would be allowed to give her son new underwear. Yes, she would say it was that. And so she started at once for the prison. Professor Burr's laboratory was about 20 miles from the cell where her son was incarcerated. As she rode on the train, seeing people in everyday clothing, commonplace occurrences going on about her, the spell of Professor Burr faded, and cold reason stared her in the face. Was it nonsense, this idea of transporting bodies through the air in invisible waves? Yet she was old-fashioned. The age of miracles had not passed for her. Radio, in which pictures and voices could be sent on wireless waves, was unexplainable to her, so perhaps... She sighed and shook her head. It was hard to believe. It was also hard to believe that her son was in deadly peril, condemned to death as some scientific fiend. Here was her station. A taxi took her to the prison, and after a talk with the warden, finally she stood there, before the screen through which she could talk to Alan, her son. "Mom!" Her heart lifted and melted within her. It was always thus when he spoke. "Alan," she whispered softly. And they were allowed to talk undisturbed. Look, Professor Burr wishes to help you, she said in a low voice. Her son, Alan Baker, MD, turned eyes of misery upon her. His hair was awry. This young man was imaginative and could therefore suffer deeply. He had the gift of turning platitudes into puzzles, and his hazel eyes were lit with an elfin quality which, if possible, endeared him even more to his mother. All his life he'd been the greatest thing in the world to this woman, and to see him in such dire straits tore her very heart. When he'd been a little boy, she'd been able to make joy appear in those eyes by a word and a pat on the head. Now that he was a man, the matter was more difficult, but she'd always done her best. "I cannot allow Professor Burr to do anything for me," he said dully. "It's his fault that I am here." "But Alan, you must listen carefully. Professor Burr can save you. He said it was all a mistake. The ally was wrong. He's not come forward before because, well, he knew he'd be able to iron out the trouble if he had time and thus snatch you from this terrible place." She put as much confidence into her voice as she could. She must, to enhearten her son. Anything to replace that look of suffering with one of hope. She would believe. She did believe. The bars, the great masses of stone which enclosed her son, would be as nothing. He would pass through them unseen and unheard. For a time, Alan spoke bitterly of Ramsay Burr, but his mother pleaded with him, telling him it was his only chance, and that the devilry that Alan suspected was in his imagination. He killed Smith in such an experiment," said Alan. "I took the blame, as you know, though I only followed his instructions. But, well, you say he claims to have found the correct alloys?" "Yes, and this suit, you must put it on. Professor Burr himself will be here to see you the day after tomorrow, the day preceding the—" She bit her lip and got out the dreaded word. "The electrocution. But, well, there won't be any electrocution, Alan. No, there can be. You'll be safe. You'll be safe in my arms." Oh, she had to fight now to hold her belief in the miracle which Burr had promised. The solid steel and stone of this room dismayed her brain. Well, the new alloy seemed to interest Alan Baker. His mother told him of the exchange of the monkey and the cat, and he nodded excitedly, growing more and more restive, and his eyes began to shine with hope and curiosity. "I've told the warden about the suit, saying it was something I made for you myself," she said in a low voice. "You must pretend the coil and the cups are things you desire for your own amusement. You know, they've allowed you a great deal of latitude since you are educated and need diversion." Yeah, well, maybe some difficulty, but I'll overcome that. Okay, tell Burr to come. I'll talk with him, and he can instruct me in the final details. It's better than waiting in here like a rat in a trap. Oh, I've been afraid of going mad, Mom, and this buoys me up." He smiled at her then, and her heart sang in the joy of relief. Well, how did the intervening days pass? Mrs. Baker couldn't sleep, could scarcely eat. She could do nothing but wait, and wait some more. She watched the meeting of her son and Ramsay Burr on the day preceding the date set for the execution. "Well, Baker," said Burr nonchalantly, nodding to his former assistant, "how are you?" "You see how I am," said Alan coldly. Yes, well, listen to what I have to say and note it carefully. There must be no mistakes. You have the suit, the cups, and the director coil. Now you must keep the suit on. The cups go under the legs of the cot you lie on, and the director under your tongue." The professor then spoke further with Alan, instructing him in scientific terms which the woman could scarcely comprehend. "Okay, tonight, then at 11:30, said Burr finally. "Be ready." Alan nodded. Mrs. Baker accompanied Burr from the prison. You will let me be with you?" she begged. "Oh, it's hardly necessary," replied the professor. "But I must see Alan the moment he's free, to make sure he's all right. then I want to be able to take him away. I have a place in which he can hide, and as soon as he's rescued, he must be taken out of sight." "Very well," said Burr, shrugging. "It's immaterial to me, so long as you do not interfere with the course of the experiment. You must sit perfectly still, and you must not speak until Alan stands before you and addresses you." "Yes, I'll obey you," she promised. Mrs. Baker then watched Professor Ramsay Burr eat his supper. Burr himself was not in the least perturbed. It was wonderful, she thought, that he could be so calm. Well, to her it was the great moment, the moment when her son would be saved from the jaws of death. Jared carried a comfortable chair into the laboratory, and she sat in it, quiet as a mouse, in one corner of the room. It was 9 o'clock, and Professor Burr was busy with his preparations. She knew he'd been working steadily for the past few days. She gripped the arms of her chair, and her heart burned within her. The professor was making sure of his apparatus. He tested this bulb and that, and carefully inspected the curious oscillating platform over which was suspended a thickly bunched group of grey-green wire, which was, seemingly, an antenna. The numerous indicators and implements seemed to be satisfactory, for, at 11:15, Burr gave an exclamation of pleasure and nodded to himself. Burr seemed to have completely forgotten about the woman. He spoke aloud occasionally, but not to her, as he brought forth a suit made of the same metal cloth as Alan must have on at this moment. Oh, the tension was terrific. Terrific for the mother, who was awaiting the culmination of the experiment which would rescue her son from the electric chair. Or might it fail? She shuddered. What if Burr was mad? But then she looked at him. She was sure he was sane, well, as sane as she was. "He will succeed," she murmured, digging her nails into the palms of her hands. "I know he will." She pushed out of her mind the picture of what was going to happen tomorrow, only a few hours from now, when Alan, her son, was due to be led to a legal death in the electric chair. Professor Burr placed the shiny suit upon his lank form, and she saw him put a duplicate coil, the same sort of machine which Alan possessed, under his tongue. The Mephistophelian figure then consulted a matter-of-fact watch. At that moment, Mrs. Baker heard, above the hum of the myriad machines in the laboratory, the slow chiming of a clock. Now was the moment for the deed. And then she feared the professor was indeed insane, for he suddenly leaped to the high bench at the table on which stood one of the oscillating platforms. Wires led out from this, and Burr sat gently upon it, a strange figure now in the subdued light. Professor Burr, however, she soon came to realize, was not insane. No, this was all part of it. He was reaching for switches near at hand, and bulbs began to glow with unpleasant light. Needles on indicators swung madly, and then, at last, Professor Burr kicked over a giant switch, which seemed to be the final movement. For several seconds the professor did not move, and then his body grew rigid, and he twisted a few times. His face, though not drawn in pain, did switch galvanically, as though actuated by slight jabs of electricity. The many tubes fluoresced, flared up in pulsing waves of violet and pink. There were grey bars of invisibility, or areas of air in which nothing visible showed. Then there came the faint, crackling hum of machinery, rather like a swarm of wasps in anger. Blue and grey threads of fire spat across the antenna. The odour of ozone came to Mrs. Baker's nostrils, and the acrid odours burned her lungs. She was staring at him now, staring at the professor's face. She half rose from her chair, and then uttered a little cry. The eyes had changed. No longer were they cold, impersonal, the eyes of a man who prided himself on the fact that he kept his arteries soft and his heart hard. No, they were loving, soft eyes. "Alan!" she cried. Yes, without doubt the eyes of her son were looking at her out of the body of Professor Ramsay Burr. "Mom," he said gently. "Oh, don't be alarmed. It worked. I'm here. I'm in Professor Burr's body." "Yes," she cried hysterically. Well, it was too weird to believe. It seemed, strangely to her, to be totally unearthly. "Oh, are you all right, darling?" she asked timidly. "Yeah. I felt nothing beyond a momentary giddy spell, a bit of nausea and some mental stiffness. Well, it was strange, and I have a slight headache. However, all is well." He grinned at her, laughed with a voice which was not quite his, yet which she recognized as coming from her son's spirit. The laugh was cracked and unlike Alan's whole-hearted mirth, yet she smiled in sympathy. "Yes, the first part is a success," said the man. "Our egos have interchanged, and soon our bodies will undergo the transformation, and then I must keep undercover. Well, I dislike Burr, yet he is a great man, and he saved me. And I suppose the slight headache which I feel is the one bequeathed me by Burr. I hope he inherits my shivers and terrors and the neuralgia for the time being, so you'll get some idea of what I've undergone." He got down now from the oscillating platform. The spirit of her son was in Ramsay's body. What are you doing now?" she asked. "Well, I must carry out the rest of it myself," he said. "Burr directed me when we talked yesterday. Well, it's more difficult when one subject is out of the laboratory and the tubes have to be checked." He went carefully about his work, and she saw him replacing 4 of the tubes with others, new ones which were ready at hand. Though it was the body of Ramsay Burr, the movements were different from the slow, precise work of the professor, and more she realized that her son now inhabited the shell before her. Well, for a moment the mother thought of attempting to dissuade her son from making the final change. Was it not better like this than to chance the disintegration of the bodies? Suppose something went wrong, and the exchange didn't take place, and her son, that is, his spirit, just went back to the death house. Midnight struck as he worked feverishly at the apparatus, the long face corrugated as he checked the dials and tubes. He worked swiftly, but evidently was following a procedure which he'd committed to memory, for he was forced to pause often to make sure of himself. "Everything's okay," said the strange voice at last. He then consulted his watch. 12:30, he said. Well, she bit her lip in terror as he cried, "Now!" and sprang to the table to take his place on the metallic platform, which oscillated to and fro under his weight. The delicate greyish metal antenna, which she knew would form a glittering halo of blue and grey threads of fire, rested now above his head. "This is the last thing," he said calmly, as he reached for the big ebony-handled switch. "I'll be myself in a few minutes, Mom." "Yes, son. Yes." The switch connected, and Alan Barker, in the form of Ramsay Burr, suddenly cried out in great pain. His mother leaped up to run to his side, but he waved her away. She stood, wringing her hands, as he began to twist and turn, as though torn apart by some invisible force. Eerie screams came from the throat of the man on the platform, and Mrs. Baker's cries of sympathy mingled in with them. The mighty motors hummed in a high-pitched, unnatural whine, and suddenly Mrs. Baker saw the tortured face before her grow dim. The countenance of the professor seemed to melt, and then there came a dull, muffled thud, a burst of white-blue flame, the odor of burning rubber, and then the tinkle of broken glass. Then back to the face came the clarity of outline, and it was still Professor Ramsay Burr's body that she was staring at. Her son, in the professor's shape, climbed from the platform and looked about him as though dazed. An acrid smoke filled the room, and burning insulation assailed the nostrils. Desperately, without looking at her, his lips set in a determined line, The man went hurriedly over to the apparatus again. God, have I forgotten them? Did I do something wrong? She heard his anguished cry. 2 tubes were burned out, and these he replaced as swiftly as possible. But he was forced to go over all the wiring again and cut out whatever had been short-circuited so that it could be hooked up anew with uninjured wire. Before he was ready to resume his seat on the platform, after half an hour of feverish haste, a knock came on the door. The person outside was impatient, and Mrs. Baker ran over and opened the portal. Jared, the whites of his eyes shining in the dim light, stood there. "Oh, the professor. Tell him that the warden wishes to speak with him. It's very important, ma'am." The body of Burr, inhabited by Alan's soul, pushed by her, and she followed falteringly, wringing her hands. She saw the tall figure snatch at the receiver and listen. "Oh, God," he cried. And then, at last, he put the receiver back on the hook and sank down in a chair, his face in his hands. Mrs. Baker went to him quickly. "What is it, Alan?" she cried. "Mom," he said hoarsely, "it was the warden of the prison. He told me that Alan Barker had temporarily gone insane and claimed to be Professor Ramsay Burr in my body." "But what's the matter?" she asked. "Can't you finish the experiment, Alan? Can't you change the 2 bodies now?" He shook his head. "Mom, they electrocuted Ramsay Burr in my body at 12:45 tonight." She screamed. She was faint, but she controlled herself with a great effort. "Yeah, but the electrocution wasn't to be until tomorrow morning," she said. Alan shook his head. "Oh, they're allowed a certain latitude, about 12 hours, he said. Burr protested up to the last moment and begged for more time. "Oh, God, then they must have come and dragged him from his bed to die in that electric chair while you were attempting the second part of the change," she said. "Yeah, that's why it failed. That's why the tubes and wires burned out and why we couldn't exchange bodies. It had begun to work. Then I could feel something terrible had happened. It was impossible to complete the beta circuit, which short-circuited. Well, they took him from the cell, you see, while I was starting the exchange of the atoms." For a time, the mother and her boy sat staring at one another. She saw the tall, eccentric figure of Ramsay Burr before her, yet she also saw the soul of her son within that form. The eyes were Alan's, the voice was soft and loving, and his spirit was with her. "Come, Alan, my son," she said softly. "Well, Burr paid the price," said Alan, shaking his head. "He became a martyr to science." The world has often wondered why Professor Ramsay Burr, so much in the headlines as a great scientist, suddenly gave up all his experiments and took up the practice of medicine. Well, now that the public furor and indignation over the death of the man Smith has died down, sentimentalists believe that Ramsay Burr has reformed and changed his icy nature, for he manifests great affection and care for Mrs. Mary Baker, the mother of the electrocuted man who had been his assistant. The Black Lamp by Captain S. P. Meek. "The clue, Carnes," said Dr. Bird slowly, "lies in those windows." Operative Carnes of the United States Secret Service shook his head before he glanced at the windows of the famous scientist's private laboratory on the top floor of the Bureau of Standards. "I usually defer to your knowledge, Doctor," he said, "but this time I think you're off on the wrong foot. If the thieves came in through the windows, what was their object in cutting that hole through the roof? The marks are very plain, and they indicate that the hole was cut in some manner from the inside." Dr. Bird smiled enigmatically. "That is too evident for discussion," he replied. "I grant you that the thieves entered from the roof through that hole. After they'd secured their booty, they left by the same route. I presume that you've noticed the marks on the roof where an aircraft of some sort, probably a helicopter, landed and then took off. A much greater question is that of what they did before they landed and cut the hole. I don't follow your reasoning, Doctor. Carnes, that hole was cut through the roof with a heavy saw. In cutting it, the workers dislodged quite a little plaster which fell to the floor and must have made a great deal of noise. Why wasn't that noise heard? Well, it was heard. The watchman heard it, but knew that Lieutenant Breslau was working here and he thought he'd made the noise. Well, surely. But why didn't Breslau hear it? How do we know that he didn't? He was taken to Walter Reed Hospital this morning with his mind an absolute blank and his tongue paralyzed. He must have seen the thieves, and they treated him in some way to ensure his silence. When he's able to talk, if he ever is, he'll probably give us a good description of them. Dr. Bird shook his head. Too thin, Connie, old dear, he said. Breslau is a very intelligent young man. He was perfectly normal when I left him shortly after midnight last night. He was working alone in here on a device of the utmost military importance. On the desk is a push button which sets ringing a dozen gongs in the building. Surely a man of that type would have had sense enough when he saw or heard intruders cutting a hole through the roof to sound an alarm which would have brought every watchman on the grounds to his assistance. He must have been knocked out before the halt was started, probably before the helicopter's landing. How? Gas of some sort? Well, the windows were all closed and locked, and I've already ascertained that the gas and water lines have not been tampered with. Gas won't penetrate through a solid roof in sufficient concentration to knock out a man like that. It was something more subtle than gas. What was it? I don't know yet. The clue to what it was lies, as I told you, in those windows. Carnes moved over and surveyed the windows closely. I see nothing unusual about them except that they need washing rather badly. Oh, they were washed last Friday, but they do look rather dirty, don't they? Suppose you take a rag and some scouring soap and clean up a pane. The detective took the proffered articles and started his task. He wet a pane of glass, rubbed up a thick lather of scouring soap, and applied it and rubbed vigorously. With clear water he washed the glass and then gave an exclamation of astonishment and examined it more closely. This isn't dirt, Doctor, he cried. The glass seems to be fogged. Dr. Bird chuckled. So it seems, he admitted. Now look at the rest of the glass around the laboratory. Carnes looked around and then walked to a table littered with apparatus and examined a dozen pieces carefully. It's all fogged in exactly the same way, Doctor, he said. The only piece of clear glass in the room is that piece of plate glass on your desk. Dr. Bird picked up a hammer and struck the plate on his desk a sharp blow. Carnes ducked instinctively, but the hammer rebounded harmlessly from the plate. This isn't glass, Carnes, said the doctor. That plate is made of vitriline, a new product which I have developed. It looks like glass, but it has entirely different properties. It's of enormous strength and is quite insensitive to shock. It has one most peculiar property. While ultraviolet and longer rays will penetrate it quite readily, it's a perfect screen for X-rays and other rays of shorter wavelength. It appears to be the only piece of transparent substance in my laboratory which has not been fogged, as you call it. Do short waves fog glass, Doctor? Not as far as I know at present. But you must remember that very little work has been done with the short wavelengths. In the vast range of waves whose lengths lie between 0 and that of the X-ray, only a few points have been investigated and definitely plotted. There may be in that range a wavelength which will fog glass. Well, then your theory is that some sort of ray machine was put in operation before the helicopter landed? It's too early to attempt any theorizing, Carnes. Let us confine ourselves to the known facts. Lieutenant Breslau was normal at midnight and was working in this room. Sometime between then and 7 this morning, he underwent certain mental and physical changes which prevent him from telling us what he observed. During the same period, a hole was cut in the roof, and things of great importance stolen. At the same time, all the glass in the laboratory became semi-opaque. The problem is to determine what connection there is between the three events. I'll handle the scientific end here, but there is some outside work to be done, and that'll be your share. Give your orders, Doctor, said the detective briefly. Well, to understand what I'm driving at, I'll have to tell you what's been stolen. Now, naturally, this is highly confidential. Some rumors have leaked out as to my experiments with radite, as I've named the new radium-containing disintegrating explosive on which I've been working. But no one short of the Secretary of War and the Chief of Ordnance and certain of their selected subordinates knows that my experiments have been successful, and that the United States is in a position to manufacture radite in almost unlimited quantities from the pitch-blende ore deposits of Wyoming and Nevada. The effects of radite will be catastrophic on the unfortunate victim on whom it is first used. The only thing left to do was to develop a gun from which radite shells could be fired with safety and precision. Ordinary propellant powders are too variable for this purpose, but I found that radite B, one form of my new explosive, can be used for propelling the shells from the gun. The ordinary gun will last only 2 or 3 rounds due to the erosive action of the radite charge on the barrel, and ordinary ordnance is heavier and more cumbersome than is necessary. When this was found to be the case, the Chief of Ordnance detailed Lieutenant Breslau, the Army's greatest expert on gun design, to work with me in an attempt to develop a suitable weapon. Breslau is a wizard at that sort of work, and has made a miniature working model of a gun with a vitriline-lined barrel, which is capable of being fired with a miniature shell. The gun will stand up under the repeated firing of radite charges, and is very light and compact, and gives an accuracy of fire control heretofore deemed impossible. From this he planned to construct a larger weapon, which would fire a shell containing an explosive charge of 2 1/2 ounces of radite at a rate of fire of 200 shots per minute. The destructive effect of each shell will be greater than that of the ordinary high-explosive shell fired from a 16-inch mortar, and all of the shells can be landed inside a 200-foot circle at a range of 15 miles. The weight of the completed gun will be less than half a ton, exclusive of the firing platform. It is Breslau's working model which has been stolen. Well, Carnes whistled softly between his teeth. The matter will have to be handled pretty delicately to avoid international complications, he said. It's hard to tell just where to look. There are a great many nations who would give any amount for a model of such a weapon. Well, the matter must be handled delicately, and also in absolute secrecy, Carnes. We're not yet ready to announce to the world the fact that we have such a weapon in our armory. It's the plan of the President to have a half-dozen of these weapons manufactured and given a demonstration of their terrible effectiveness to representatives of the powers of the world. Think what an argument the existence of such a weapon will be for the furtherance of his plans for disarmament and universal peace. Public sentiment will force disarmament on the world, for even the worst jingoists could no longer defend armaments in the face of America's offer to scrap these super engines of destruction and to destroy the plans from which they were made. If the model has fallen into the hands of any civilized power, the damage is not irreparable, for public opinion would force its surrender in return. Oh, it is among the uncivilized powers that our search must first be made. Well, that makes the problem of where to start more complicated. On the contrary, it simplifies it immensely. At the head of the uncivilized powers stands one which has the brains, the scientific knowledge, and the manufacturing facilities to make terrible use of such a weapon. In addition, the aim of that power is to overthrow all world governments and set up in their stead its own tyrannical disorder. Need I name it? You refer to Russia? No, not to Russia, the great slumbering giant who will someday take her place in the sun in fellowship with the other nations, but rather to Bolsheviki, that empire within an empire, that horrible power which is holding sleeping Russia in chains of steel and blood. It is there that our search must first be made. Well, of course, they have no official representative in America. No, but the Young Labour Party is as much their accredited representative as the British ambassador is of Imperial Britain. Your first task will be to trail down and locate every leader of that group and to investigate his present activities. Well, I can tell you where most of them are without investigation. Denberg, Semensky, and Karuska are in Atlanta. Fedorovich and Kaspar are in Leavenworth. Saranoff is dead. Well, presumably. I, Doctor, I saw with my own eyes the destruction of the submarine in which he was riding. Did you see his dead body? No. Neither did I, and I'll never be sure until I do. Once before we were certain of his death, and he bobbed up with a new fiendish device. We cannot eliminate Saranoff. All right, I'll include him in my plans. Do so. Besides, a hypothetical Saranoff, there are half a dozen or more of the old leaders of the gang who are alive and at liberty, so far as we know. They fled the country after the Coast Guard broke up their alien smuggling scheme, but some of them may have returned. There are also 30 or 40 underlings who should be located and checked upon, and, in addition, we must not lose sight of the fact that the new heads of the organization may have been smuggled into the United States. It's no simple task that I'm setting you, Carnes, but I know that you and Bolton will see it through if anyone can. Thanks, Doctor. We'll do our best. Now, if I'm not speaking out of turn, what are you planning on doing in the meantime? I'm going to start Taylor off on an ultra-shortwave generator and try a few experiments along that line. Breslaw is at Walter Reed, and they're doing all they can for him, but, well, until I can get some definite information as to the underlying cause of his condition, they are more or less shooting in the dark. How are they treating him? By electric stimulations and vibratory treatments, and by keeping him in a darkened room. By the way, Carnes, if I am correct in my line of thought, it would be well to have an extra guard put over Karuska. He was the only real expert in ordnance that the young Labor Party had, and if they have Breslau's model, they'll need him to supervise the construction of a gun. I'll attend to that at once, Doctor. Is there anything else? No, not that I know of. I'm going out to Tacoma Park this afternoon and have another look at Breslau. But it's too soon to hope for any change in his condition. Aside from the time I'll be out there, you can find me either here or at my home, in case anything develops. I'll get on that job at once, Doctor. Thanks, man. Remember that speed must be the keynote of your work. The telephone bell at the head of Dr. Bird's bed woke into noisy activity. The doctor roused himself and took down the instrument sleepily. A glance at the clock showed him that it was 4 in the morning, and he muttered a malediction on the one who had called him. "Hello," he said into the receiver. "Dr. Bird speaking." "Doctor," came a crisp voice over the wire. "Wake up. This is Carnes talking. Something has broken loose." All trace of sleep vanished from Dr. Bird's face, and his eyes glowed momentarily with a particular glitter which Carnes would at once have recognized as indicative of the keenest interest. "What's happened, Carnes?" he demanded. "I telephoned Atlanta this morning and arranged to have an extra guard put over Karuska, as you suggested. The matter was simplified by the fact that he and 9 others were confined in the prison infirmary. The warden agreed to do as I told him, and, in addition to the other guards, a special man was placed in the ward near Karuska's bed. At 2 a.m., the lights in the ward went out. Accidentally, or were they put out? Well, they haven't found that out yet. At any rate, they're all out right now. But Karuska and all the other inmates and all the guards at that particular ward have gone crazy." "The hell you say?" "Well, not only that, they're also partially paralyzed. The description I got over the telephone corresponds exactly with the condition of Lieutenant Breslaw as you described it to me. Now here's the most interesting part of the whole affair. The special guard over Karuska was only lightly affected, and has already recovered and is in a position to tell you exactly what happened. I got a garbled account of the affair from the warden. Something about a goldfish bowl or something like that. The warden wouldn't take it seriously enough to give me details. I didn't press for them much, for I knew that you'd rather get them at first hand." "I certainly would. I'll be ready to leave for Atlanta in less than 10 minutes. "I expected that, Doctor, and the car's already on its way to pick you up. I'll meet you at Langley Field, where a plane has already been tuned up and will be ready to take off by the time we get there." "Good work, Hans. I'll see you at the field." A car was waiting for Carnes and Dr. Bird when the Langley Field plane slid down to a landing at Atlanta. At the penitentiary, Dr. Bird went direct to the infirmary where Karuska had been confined. As he entered, he shot a keen glance around and gave an exclamation of satisfaction. Look at the windows, Carnes, he cried. Carnes went over to the nearest window and moistened his fingertip and applied it experimentally to the glass. The moisture produced no effect, for the glass of the windows was permanently clouded, as was that of the doctor's laboratory. Whatever happened in my laboratory the night before last was repeated here last night with a similar object, said the doctor. The object there was to steal a gun model. Here it was to steal a man who could construct a full-size gun from the model. I understand that one of the guards escaped the fate which overtook the rest of the persons in the infirmary. Not altogether, Doctor, replied the warden. I think that his mind is somewhat affected, for he tells a wild yarn and insists on trying to wear a goldfish bowl on his head. I have him under observation in the psychopathic ward. Dr. Bird shot a scornful glance at the warden. There are none so blind as those who will not see, he murmured. Yeah, by all means, I wish to see him, he went on aloud. Will you have him brought here at once, please? The warden nodded and spoke to one of the attendants. In a few moments, a tall, fair-haired young giant stood before the doctor. Dr. Bird pushed back his unruly shock of black hair with his fingers, those long, slim, mobile fingers which alone betrayed the artist in his makeup. I shot a piercing glance from his black eyes into the blue ones, which returned the gaze unabashed. What's your name? He asked. Bailey, sir. You were on guard here last night? Yes, sir. I was detailed as a special guard over number 9764. Tell me in your own words what happened. Don't be afraid to speak out. I'm not going to disbelieve you. And above all, tell me everything, no matter how unimportant it may seem to you. I'll judge the importance of things for myself. I'm Dr. Bird of the Bureau of Standards. The guard's face lit up at the doctor's words. I've heard of you, Doctor, he said in a relieved tone, and I'll be glad to tell you everything. 10 o'clock last night, I received Carragher as special guard over number 9764. Carragher reported that the prisoner was somewhat restless and hadn't been asleep as of yet. I sat down about 15 feet from his bed and prepared to keep an eye on him until I was relieved at 6 o'clock this morning. Well, nothing happened until about 2 o'clock. Number 9764 was restless, as Carragher had said, but toward midnight he quieted down and apparently went to sleep. Well, I was sleepy myself. I got up and took a turn around the room every 5 minutes to be sure that I kept awake. And that's how I'm so sure of the time, sir. Dr. Bird nodded. At 5 minutes to 2, just as I got up, I heard a noise outside like a big electric fan. It sounded like it came from directly overhead, and I went to the window and looked out. I couldn't see anything, though I could hear it pretty plainly. And then I heard a noise like someone had fallen on the roof. Almost at the same time there came a sort of high-pitched whine, a good deal like the noise an electric motor makes when it's running at high speed. I thought of giving an alarm. I didn't want to stir things up unless I was sure that there was some necessity for it. So I started for the door to ask one of the outside guards if he'd heard anything. As I turned toward number 9764, I saw that he'd been sitting up in bed while my back was turned. As soon as he saw that I'd noticed him, he lay back real quick and pulled the covers over his head. He moved pretty quick, but not so quick that I couldn't see that he'd had something that glittered like glass before his face. I started over toward his bed to see what he was doing, and then it was that the light started to get dim. Go on, said the doctor as Bailey paused. His eyes were glittering brightly now. Well, sir, Doctor, I don't hardly know how to describe what happened next. The lights were getting dim, but not as they ordinarily do when the current starts to go off. The filaments were shining as bright as they ever did, but well, the light didn't seem to be able to penetrate the air. The whole room seemed to be filled with a blackness that stopped the light. No, sir, it wasn't like fog. It was more like something more powerful than the lights was in the room and was killing them. It wasn't only the lights which were affected. It was me as well. The blackness, whatever it was getting into me as well as into the room. I couldn't seem to make myself think like I wanted to. Tried to yell to give an alarm. I found that I could hardly whisper. I went toward the bed and I saw number 9764 sit up again. He had like a goldfish bowl pulled down over his head. It was evident that it was keeping the blackness away, for I could see him plainly, and his eyes were as bright as ever. The nearer I got to him, the funnier I felt. I began to be afraid that I'd go out. Number 9764 got up out of bed, and I could see him grinning at me through the bowl. He reached up and adjusted that bowl, and all of a sudden I realized that whatever was knocking me out was not affecting him because he had that thing on. Well, I jumped for him with the idea of taking the bowl off and putting it on my own head. He saw what I was up to and fought like a cornered rat, but the blackness hadn't affected my muscles. Yeah, I'm a pretty big man, sir, and number 9764 is a little runt. It didn't take me long to get the bowl off his head and pull on over mine. As soon as I did that, I seemed to be able to think clearer. While I was sitting on number 9764, I was ready to tap him with a persuader if he started anything, but, well, I didn't have to. In a few minutes, he stopped struggling and lay perfectly quiet. Well, the lights kept getting dimmer and dimmer until they went out altogether, and the room became pitch dark. Well, it wasn't exactly as if the lights had gone out, sir. Well, I seemed to know that they were still there, and were burning as bright as ever, but they couldn't penetrate the blackness in the room, if you understand what I mean. I think I do, said Dr. Bird slowly. It was a good deal as if you'd seen a glass filled with a pale red liquid, and someone had dumped black ink into the fluid and hid the red color. You'd know that the red was still there, but you wouldn't be able to see it through the black. Yeah, that's exactly what it was like, Doctor. You described it better than I can. Well, at any rate, after it got real dark, I heard a low whistle from the roof. Number 9764 made a struggle to get up for a moment, then lay quiet again. The whistle sounded again. Then I heard someone call, "Caruso!" Everything was quiet for a while. Then the same voice called again, and said some stuff in a foreign language I couldn't understand. Well, I kept perfectly quiet to see what would happen. About 10 minutes the whole room remained perfectly dark, as I've said, and all the while I could hear that whining noise. All of a sudden it began to sound in a lower note, and then I could see the lights again. Very dimly, like the black ink you spoke of, was fading out. The note got lower until it stopped altogether, and the lights came on brighter until they were normal again. Then I heard a scraping noise on the roof, and the noise I had heard first, like a big electric fan. Well, I looked at the clock, and it was 2:20. For a few minutes I wasn't able to collect my wits. When I got up off of number 9764 at last, he stared at me as though he didn't know a thing, and I heaved him back into his bed and ran to the door to summon an outside guard. I could still talk in a husky whisper, but not loud, and I wasn't surprised when no one heard me. Well, my orders were not to let number 9764 out of my sight, and this was an emergency, so I left the ward and found a guard. It was Madigan. He was standing on his beat, staring at nothing. When I touched him, he looked at me, and there was the same vacant look in his eyes that I'd seen in the prisoners. I talked to him in a whisper, but he didn't seem to understand. So I left him and went to a telephone and called for help. Mr. Lawson, the warden, got here with guards in a couple of minutes, and I tried to tell him what had happened, but I couldn't talk loud, and I was afraid to take the fishbowl off my head. What happened next? Mr. Lawson took me to his office, and on the way we passed under an arc light. As soon as I got under it, I began to feel better. My voice became stronger. I saw that it was doing me some good, and I stopped under it for an hour before my voice got back to normal. It seemed to clear the fog from my brain, too, and I was able, about 4 o'clock, to tell everything that had happened. Mr. Lawson seemed to think that my brain was affected as well as the others, and he sent me to the hospital. And, well, that's all, Doctor. Do you feel perfectly normal now? Yes, sir. Well, there's no need for confining this man longer, Mr. Lawson. He's as well as he ever was. Clarence, get the Walter Reed Hospital on the telephone. Tell them that I said to treat Lieutenant Breslau with light rays, rich in ultraviolets. Tell them to give him an overdose of them and not to put goggles on him. Keep him in the sun all day and under sun-ray arcs at night until further orders. Mr. Lawson, give the same treatment to the men who were disabled last night. If you haven't enough sun-ray arcs in your hospital, put them under an ordinary arc light in the yard. Bailey, you still got that fishbowl? It's in my office, Doctor, said the warden. Good enough. Send for it at once, and By the way, you have 2 more communists here, Denberg and Szymanski, haven't you?
I think so. Oh, I'll have to consult the records before I can be positive.
Well, I'm sure that you have. Look the matter up and let me know. The warden hurried away to carry out the doctor's orders, and an orderly appeared in a few moments with a hollow globe made of some crystalline, transparent substance. Despite its presence in the infirmary the evening before, there was no trace of clouding apparent. Dr. Bird took it and examined it critically. He rapped it with his knuckles and then stepped to the door and hurled it down violently to the concrete floor of the yard. The globe rebounded without injury, and he caught it. Vitrolene, or a good imitation of it, he remarked to Carnes. After you get through talking to the hospital, get Taylor on the wire. There's plenty of loose vitrolene in the bureau, and I want him to send about 50 square feet of it by a special plane at once. As Carnes left the room, the warden reappeared.
The men are all lying in the sun now, Doctor, he said. I find that we have the 2 men you mentioned confined here. They're both in Tier A, Building 6.
Is that an isolated building?
No, it's one wing of the old main building.
On which floor?
The 2nd floor. It's a 6-story building.
Have they been moved there recently?
They've been there for nearly a year.
In that case, there'll be little chance of another attack of this sort tonight. At the same time, I would advise you to station extra guards there tonight, and every night until I notify you otherwise. Caution them to watch the lights carefully, and to give an alarm at once if they appear to get dim. In that case, send men to the roof with rifles with orders to shoot to kill anyone they find there. I'm going back to Washington, and I'm going to take Karuska, your number 9764, with me. You'd better have one of the guards in the corridor where Denberg and Szymanski are. Now, where this goldfish bowl, as you call it. A lot of plate glass, at least it will look like it, will come from Washington by plane. Cut it into sheets a foot square and use surgeon's plaster to make some temporary glass helmets for your men. I want all your guards to wear them until I either settle this matter or else send you some better helmets. You understand?
I understand all right, but I'm afraid I can't do it. The wearing of such appliances would interfere with the efficiency of my men as guards.
Brain and tongue paralysis would interfere rather more seriously, it seems to me. In any event, I have sufficient authority to enforce my request. If you are at all doubtful, call up the Attorney General and ask him.
Well, the warden hesitated. If you don't mind, I think I will call Washington, Doctor, he said. I'll have to get authority to turn number 9764 over to you in any event.
Call all you wish, Mr. Lawson. Mr. Carnes is talking to Washington now, and we'll have a clear line for you in a few minutes. Meanwhile, get a set of shackles on Karuska and get him ready to travel by plane. He appears to be suffering from mental paralysis, but I don't know how his case will develop. He may go violently insane at any moment, and I don't care to be left in a plane with an unbound maniac. Major Martin looked up from the prone figure of Karuska. His condition duplicates that of Lieutenant Breslau, Dr. Bird, he said. We received your telephone message this afternoon, and we kept Breslau in a flood of sunlight until dusk, then put him under sunray lamps. I don't know how you got onto that treatment, but it's having a very beneficial effect. He can already make inarticulate sounds, and his eyes are not quite as vacant as they were. If he keeps on improving as he has, he should be able to talk intelligently in a few days. If you wish to question this man, why not give him the same treatment?
I haven't time, Major. I must make him talk tonight, if it's humanly possible.
I called you in because you're the most eminent authority on the brain in the government service. Is there any way of artificially stimulating this man's brain so that we can force the secrets of his subconscious mind from him? The Major sat for a moment, in profound thought. Oh, there is a way, Doctor, he said at length, but it is a method which I would not dare to use. By applying high-frequency electrical stimulations to the medulla oblongata, at the same time bathing the cerebellum with ultraviolet. It may be done, but, well, the chances are that either death or insanity would result. I would not do it.
Major Martin, this man is a reckless and dangerous international criminal. If his gang carries out the plan which I fear they've formed, the lives of thousands, well, of millions, may pay for your hesitation. I will assume full responsibility for the test if you'll make it, and I have the authority of the President of the United States behind me. Well, in that case, Doctor, I have no choice. The President is the Commander-in-Chief of the Army, and if those are his orders, the experiment will be carried out. As a matter of form, I will ask that your orders be reduced to writing. I will write them gladly, Major. Please proceed with the experiment without delay.
Major Martin bowed and spoke to a waiting orderly. The prostrate figure of Karuska was wheeled down a corridor into the electrical laboratory, and with the aid of the laboratory technician, the surgeon made his preparations. The moss lamp was arranged to throw a flood of ultraviolet over the Russian's cranium, while the leads from a deep therapy X-ray tube was connected, one to the front of Karuska's throat and the other to the base of his brain. At a signal from the Major, a nurse began to administer ether.
I guarantee nothing, Dr. Bird, said the Major. The paralysis of the vocal cords may be physical, in which case the victim will still be unable to speak, regardless of the brain stimulation. If, however, the evident paralysis is due to some obscure influence on the brain, it may work.
In any event, I'll hold you blameless and thank you for your help, replied the doctor. Now please start the stimulation.
Major Martin closed a switch, and the hum of a high-tension alternator filled the laboratory. The Russian quivered for a moment and then lay still. Major Martin nodded, and Dr. Bird stepped to the side of the operating table.
Ivan Karuska, he said slowly and distinctly. Do you hear me?
The Russian's lips quivered, and an unintelligible murmur came from them.
Ivan Karuska, repeated Dr. Bird. Do you hear me?
There was a momentary struggle on the part of the Russian, and then a surprisingly clear voice came from his lips.
I do. Who is the present head of the Young Labour Party?
Again there was a pause before the name. Saranov came from the lips of the insensible figure. Carnes gave a sharp exclamation, but a gesture from the doctor silenced him.
Is Saranov alive?
Yes.
Is he in the United States?
No, he is in London.
Is he coming to the United States?
Yes.
When?
I do not know. Soon. As soon as we are ready for him.
Where is he living in London?
I don't know.
How did you get word that you were to be rescued from Atlanta?
A message was smuggled into me by O'Grady, a guard in our pay.
What was the vitriline helmet for?
To protect me from the effects of the black lamp.
What's the black lamp?
I do not know exactly. Saranov invented it. It gives a black light and it kills all other light except sunlight, and it paralyzes the brain.
Did you know that the model of the Breslau gun had been stolen?
Yes.
What were you going to do after you were rescued from jail?
I was going to make a full-sized gun. We have a disappearing gun platform built in the swamps at the juncture of the Potomac and Piscataway Creek. The gun was to be mounted there, and we would shell Washington and institute a reign of terror. It would be a signal for uprisings all over the country.
Is there a black lamp at that gun platform?
Yes. The black lamp will kill both the flash and the report.
Where did you get the formula for radite?
We got it from one of Dr. Bird's assistants. His name... As he spoke the last few sentences, Karuska's voice had steadily risen, almost to a shriek. As he endeavored to give the name of the doctor's treacherous helper, his voice changed to an unintelligible screech, and then died away into silence. Major Martin stepped forward and bent over the prone figure. Hurriedly he tore away the electrical connections and placed a stethoscope over the Russian's heart. He listened for a moment, and then straightened up, his face pale. I hope that the information you obtained is worth a life, Dr. Bird, he said, his voice trembling slightly, because it has cost one.
It may easily save thousands of lives.
I thank you, Major, and I will see that no blame attaches to you for your actions. I only wish that he'd lived long enough to tell me the name of my assistant, who has sold me out to Saranov. However, we'll get that information in other ways. Garnes, telephone Lawson at Atlanta to slam O'Grady into a cell pending investigation, while I get Camp Meade on the wire and order up a couple of tanks. We're going to attack that gun emplacement at daybreak.
The telephone bell in the laboratory jangled sharply. Major Martin answered it and turned to Carnes. "You're wanted on the telephone, Mr. Carnes." The detective stepped forward and took the transmitter.
"Carnes speaking,"
he said. "Yeah, oh, hello, Bolton. Yeah, we have Karuska here, or rather his body. Yes, Dr. Bird is here right now."
"You've what? Great Scott. Wait a minute. Dr. Bird,"
he cried eagerly, turning from the telephone. "Bolton has located the Washington headquarters of the Young Labor Party."
Dr. Bird sprang to the instrument. "Bird speaking, Bolton," he cried. "You've located their headquarters? Who's running it? Strensky, eh? Oh, you're on the right track. He used to be Saronov's right-hand man. Where's the place located? Don't seem to recollect the spot. You have it well surrounded? Where are you speaking from? All right, we'll join you as quickly as we can. Now, keep your patrols out and don't let anyone get away."
He then hung up the receiver and turned to Carnes.
"Did you have the car wait?" he asked. "Good enough. We'll jump for the bureau and pick up all the vitriol laying around loose and join Bolton. He thinks he has the whole outfit bottled up."
Bolton was waiting as the car rolled up and Dr. Bird leaped out.
"Where are they?"
demanded the doctor eagerly.
"In an abandoned factory building about 300 yards from here," replied the chief of the Secret Service. "I traced them through New York. We've been watching the place ever since yesterday noon, and I know that Stanesky is in there with half a dozen others. No one has tried to leave since we set our watch. Funny thing has happened. One funny thing. About an hour ago, a peculiar red glow suffused the whole building. It's died down a good deal since, but we can still see it through the windows. Can you tell us what that means?" "No, I couldn't, Bolton, but we'll find out. How many men have you?"
"I have 16 stationed around."
"That's more than we'll need.
I have only vitriol shields and helmets, enough to equip 6 men. Pick out your 3 best men to go with us, and we'll make a try at entering." Bolton strode off into the darkness and returned in a few moments with 3 men at his heels. Dr. Bird spoke briefly to the operatives, all of them men who had been his companions on other adventures. He explained the need for the vitriol helmets and shields, and without comment the 6 donned their armor and followed Bolton as he strode toward the building. As they approached, a dull red glow could be plainly seen through the windows, and Dr. Bird paused and studied the phenomenon for a moment.
"I don't know what that means, Bolton," he said softly, "but I don't like the looks of it. Stranesky is up to some devilment or other. I wouldn't be a bit surprised to find out that he knows all about your pickets and is ready for a raid."
"We'd better rush the place then," muttered Bolton. Dr. Bird nodded agreement, and with a sharp command to his men, Bolton broke into a run. Not a shot was fired as they approached, and the front door gave readily to Bolton's touch. As it opened, there came a grating sound from the roof, followed by the whir of a propeller. Dr. Bird ran out of the building and glanced up.
"A helicopter," he cried. "They were expecting us and have escaped."
He drew his pistol and fired ineffectually at the great bird-like ship which was rising almost noiselessly into the air. He cursed and turned again to the building. Bolton still stood in the room which they'd first entered. His flashlight showed it to be empty, but from under a door on the opposite side a line of dull, red light glowed evilly. With his pistol ready in his hand, Bolton approached the door on hands and knees. When he reached it, he threw his shoulder against it and dropped flat to the floor as the door swung open. No shot greeted him, and he stared for a moment, and then rose to his feet. "Nothing in here but some glass statues," he announced. Dr. Bird followed him into the room. As he looked at what Bolton had called glass statues, he gasped and shielded his eyes.
"God in heaven," he said. "Those were living men."
Before them were 3 men, or what had been 3 men. All stood in strained attitudes with a look of horror frozen on their faces. The thing that made the spectators shudder was that their bodies had, by some diabolical method, been rendered semi-transparent. The dull red light which suffused the room emanated from the 3 bodies. Dr. Bird examined them closely, being careful not to touch them.
"The identity of my treacherous assistant is known,"
he said grimly as he pointed at the middle figure. It was Gironde. What's this? He took an envelope from the hand of the middle figure and opened it. A sheet of paper fell out and he picked it up and read it. My dear Mr. Bolton, ran the note. Your methods of tracing and picketing my headquarters are so crude as to be almost laughable. This base has served its purpose, and we were ready to abandon it at any event, but I couldn't resist the temptation to let you almost nab us. The 3 men whom you will find here are agents who failed in their duty. If you're interested in learning the method of their execution, you might take to heart the words of your colleague, Dr. Bird. The clue lies in those windows. Carnes glanced at the windows and gave out a cry of surprise. The glass was opaque, as had been the glass in the doctor's laboratory and the glass in the infirmary at Atlanta. The fogging, however, was much more pronounced, and the opaque glass gave faintly the same red effulgence which came from the 3 bodies. What does it mean, Doctor? He asked. I don't know, Carnes, said Dr. Bird slowly. I foresee that I am going to have to do a great deal of work on short wavelengths soon. It is doubtless the effect of some modification of the black lamp which has done it. Oh, look out! He leapt to one side as he spoke, drawing Bolton and Carnes with him. A panel in the side of the wall opposite the doorway had slid open, silently, and through the opening poured out a beam of fiery red. Full on the 3 bodies it fell, and then spread out to fill the room. Dr. Bird had drawn the 2 nearest men out of the direct beam, but one of the Secret Service men stood full in its path. In the excitement of entering, he had dropped his vitrilene shield, and the livid ray fell full on his defenseless body. As they watched, an expression of horror spread over his face, and he strove to move to one side, but he was held helpless. Slowly, he stiffened, and as the ray bored through him, his body became semi-transparent, and the same dull red glow which emanated from the 3 bodies they'd found began to shine forth from him, too. Bolton strove to break from the doctor's grasp and rushed to the rescue, but Dr. Bird held him with a grip of iron. Too late, he said grimly. Chalk up another murder to the arch-fiend who has committed the others. I don't know the nature of that ray, and vitrilene may not be an adequate defense against its full force. We'd better get out of here and attack the place from the rear. Carefully edging their way around the sides of the room, the 5 men made their way out through the door. Dr. Bird slammed the door shut behind him and led the way out of the building and around to the rear. A door loomed before them, and he cautiously tried it. It gave to his touch as he entered, and as he set foot on the threshold, a terrific explosion came from the interior of the building. Run! He shouted as he led the way in retreat. If that is a radite explosion, it will act for several seconds. From a safe distance they watched. One corner of the building had been torn off by the force of the explosion, and as they watched, the rest of the building gradually collapsed and sank into a pile of ruins. They'd planned on a visit from us, all right, said Dr. Bolton grimly. They had a surprise for us any way we jumped. If we went in the front door, that devil's ray was to finish us. And if we went in the back door, the whole place was arranged to blow up as we entered. I only hope that Staninsky thinks he's got us all and doesn't expect an attack on his next base in the morning. If he doesn't, I think we may give him a rather unpleasant surprise. Of course, that lamp is smashed into atoms and buried under the debris, but I don't know what other devil's contraptions that ruin holds. Bolton, have your men picket it and allow no one near it until I get back. I've got to get to a telephone and get a couple of tanks from Meade and a plane or 2 from Langley Field. 2 tanks made their way slowly across country. The front of each tank was protected by a heavy sheet of vitrilene, while the turrets of the tanks projected the wicked-looking muzzles of 37mm guns. Overhead, 2 airplanes from Langley Field soared, scouting the country. Dr. Bird and Carnes rode in the leading tank. It ought to be somewhere near here. Unless Karuska lied, said Carnes as he swept the country with a pair of binoculars. He didn't lie, returned Dr. Bird. It was his subconscious mind that spoke, and it never lies. He spoke of the gun emplacement as being in a swamp, and I have a strong idea that it's a submersible. Of course, it's bound to be well camouflaged,
both from land and from air observation. The plane circled around again and again, quartering the air like a pair of well-trained bird dogs would quarter a hunting field. First high and then low they swooped back and forth, the tanks lumbering slowly along in the same direction. Presently the occupants of the leading tank saw one of the planes bank sharply and swing around. It dropped to an altitude of only a few 100 feet and turned and went back over the ground it had just crossed. "I believe that fellow sees something," exclaimed Carnes. As he spoke, 3 green very lights came from the cockpit of the plane. The tank driver gave a grunt of satisfaction and turned the nose of his vehicle in that direction. The second tank followed. Hardly had they turned in the new direction before the ground began to get soft under their tracks and the heavy vehicles began to sink. The driver of the doctor's tank forced it ahead, but the tank sank deeper in the mire until water flowed in around the feet of the occupants. "I reckon we'll have to get out and walk pretty soon, Doctor," said the driver. Dr. Bird grunted in acquiescence. The tank made its way forward a few yards before the engine sputtered and died. The second tank stopped when the first one did, 50 yards behind it. Donning vitriline helmets and taking vitriline shields in their hands, the crews of both tanks climbed out into the waist-deep water and gathered around the doctor for orders. "Form a skirmish line at 10-pace intervals and cross the swamp," he directed. "We may meet with no opposition, but if there is, the more scattered we are, the safer we'll be. You all have hand grenades as well as your rifles." A murmur of assent answered him, and the line formed and started across the swamp. They'd gone perhaps 100 yards when 3 red lights came from one of the planes circling overhead. "Get down!" cried the doctor, dropping to his knees into the muck. 400 yards ahead of him, a concrete platform emerged from the marsh and rose slowly into the air. It was roofed with a dome of what looked like plate glass, but which the doctor shrewdly suspected was vitriline. When the base of the platform was 2 feet above the level of the water, the dome slid silently aside, disclosing 2 men bending over a tiny gun. Dr. Bird leveled his binoculars. "That's the Breslau gun model that was stolen as sure as I'm a foot high," he cried. "They must have made some miniature shells and be planning to fire it." Slowly a pall of intense blackness rose from the marsh and enveloped the platform and hid it from view. A whining noise came from overhead, and then a crash like a thunderbolt. The blast of the explosion threw the attackers face down into the swamp, and when they arose and looked back, there was merely a gaping hole where the leading tank had been. The second tank suddenly seemed to rise into the air and fly into millions of tiny fragments, and a second thunderous blast sent them again to their knees. "Oh, radite!" bellowed Dr. Bird to Carnes. "Imagine the effect if that had been a full charge fired from a completed Breslau gun. Watch the planes now. I think they're going to drop a few eggs on them." The black mist cleared as if by magic, and the platform was now in plain view. The big glass dome rolled back into place as the 2 planes swept over at an elevation of 2,000 feet. From each one, a small black cigar-shaped object was released and fell in a long parabola toward the earth. The glass dome, which had been closing over the gun platform, rolled quickly back, and a long beam of intense blackness pierced the heavens. First one and then the other of the falling bombs disappeared from view into it, and then the black column faded from view. The 2 bombs fell with increasing speed, but the dome closed over the platform before they struck. The 2 hit the dome at almost the same instant, and instead of the blinding crash they'd expected, the watchers saw the bombs rebound from the dome and fall harmlessly into the water. "Oh, stymied," muttered the doctor. "I wonder what other properties that confounded lamp has." He resumed his advance, Carnes and the soldiers keeping abreast of him. When they were within 200 yards of the platform, it rose again and the transparent dome rolled back. A beam of black shot forth over the swamp, searching them out and hiding them from view. First one and then another felt the effects of the black beam, but the vitriline which the doctor had provided stood them in good stead, and, aside from a slight shortening of their breath, none of the attackers felt any the worse. "Come on, men!" cried the doctor as his athletic figure ploughed forward through the breast-deep water. "That's their worst weapon, and it's harmless against us." Cheering, they fought their way toward the platform.
It sunk for a moment and then rose again. As the dome swung back, a sharp crackle of machine gun fire sounded, and the water before them was whipped into foam by the plunging bullets. One of the soldiers gave a sharp cry and slumped forward into the water. "Fire at will," shouted the lieutenant in command. A crackle of rifle fire answered the tattoo of the machine gun, and the sharp ping of bullets striking on the dome could be plainly heard. An occasional shot kicked up a spurt of white dust from the concrete, but the machine gun kept up a steady rattle of fire, and the soldiers kept their heads almost at the level of the water. There came the roar of an airplane motor, and one of the planes swept over the platform, 100 yards in the air, with 2 machine guns spraying streams of bullets onto the platform. 2 men abandoned their machine gun and crouched under the partially folded back dome as the second plane swept over, and Dr. Bird took advantage of the lull to advance his party a few yards nearer. Again, the defenders of the platform rushed to their gun, but the first plane had turned and swooped down with both guns going, and again they were forced to take shelter while the doctor and his force made another advance. The second plane had turned and followed the first, but the defenders had had enough. The transparent dome closed over them, and the platform sank back into the marsh. With a shout, Dr. Bird led the way forward again. The attackers were within 100 yards of the platform when it again rose above the surface of the water. The guns had disappeared, but in their place stood an airship. It was a small affair with stubby wings, above which were 2 helicopter blades revolving at high speed. No sound of a motor could be heard. The transparent dome rolled back, and like a bullet, the little craft shot into the air, followed by a futile volley from the soldiers. Hardly had it appeared than the 2 airplanes bore down on it with machine guns going. The helicopter paid no attention to them for a moment, and then came a puff of smoke from its side. The leading plane swerved sharply, and the helicopter fired again. The leading plane maneuvered about, trying to get a machine gun to bear, while the second plane climbed swiftly to get above the helicopter and pour a deadly stream of fire down into it. It gained position and swooped down to the attack, but another puff of smoke came from the side of the helicopter, and there was a thunderous report and a blinding flash in the sky. As the smoke cleared away, no trace of the ill-fated plane could be seen. The helicopter hung motionless in the air, as though daring the remaining plane to attack. Well, the plane accepted the challenge and bore down at full speed on the stranger. Again came a puff of smoke, but the plane swerved, and an answering shot came from its side. It was above the helicopter, and the shell which missed its mark plunged to the ground. When it struck, there came a roar and a flash, and the whole earth seemed to shake. The helicopter shot upward into the air and forward, both its elevating fans and its propellers whirling blurs of light. The airplane followed at its sharpest climbing angle, but was helpless to compete with its swifter climbing rival. "He's got away," groaned Carnes. "Not yet, my friend," cried the doctor, hopping with excitement. "He isn't safe yet. I never told you, but one Breslau gun had been made, and it's on that plane. It has deadly accuracy and is good for 15 miles. That's Lieutenant Dreen at the controls and Mason at the gun." As he spoke, the plane swung around and made a half loop. For a few yards it flew upside down and then whirled swiftly. As it turned, there came a sharp report and a puff of smoke from its rear cockpit. High above, the helicopter had ceased climbing and hovered motionless. As the plane fired, the helicopter shot forward like an arrow from a bow, and thereby spelled its doom. Not for nothing did Captain Mason bear the title of the best aerial gunner in the Air Corps. He'd foreseen what the action of his opponent would be, and had allowed for just such a move. Far up in the sky came a blinding flash and a cloud of smoke. When the smoke cleared, the sky was empty, except for a little scattered debris falling slowly to the ground. "And that's that," exclaimed Dr. Bird as he finished his examination of the underground laboratory with which the gun platform connected. "The lamp has gone to glory with Breslau's gun model and 2 of the best brains of the Young Labour Party. I'm sure that Stanesky was one of those 2 men, and I wish the whole gang had been on board." "Don't you think that this is the end of it, Doctor?" "Oh, no, Carnes, I don't.
We know that the real brains of this outfit is Saranoff, and Saranoff is still alive. He probably won't try to use his black lamp again because I'll have a defense against it in a short time, now that I've seen it in action, but he will try something else. The whole object of life to a loyal citizen of Bolshevikia is to reduce the whole world to the barbarous level in which they hold Russia, and they will spare no pains or effort to accomplish it. The greatest obstacle to their success at present is the President of the United States. He's loved and respected by the whole world, and if he is spared, he will forge the world into a great machine for the preservation of peace and universal goodwill. That would be fatal to Bolshevikia's plans, and they will spare no effort to remove him. By the grace of God, we have saved him from harm so far, but until we remove Saranoff permanently from the scene, I will never feel safe for him. What do you suppose they'll try next, Doctor? Well, that Khans. Time alone will tell. Hell's Dimension by Tom Curry. Now, Professor Lambert, tell us what you've done with the body of your assistant, Miss Madge Crawford. Her car is outside your door, stood there since early yesterday morning. There are no footprints leading away from the house, and you can't expect us to believe that an airplane picked her off the roof. It'll be a lot easier if you tell us where she is. Her parents are greatly worried about her. When they telephoned, you refused to talk to them, would not allow them to speak to Miss Crawford. Well, they're alarmed as to her fate. While you're not the sort of man who would injure a young woman, still, things do look bad for you, and you'd better explain fully. John Lambert, a man of about 36, tall, spare, with black hair which was slightly tinged with grey at the temples in spite of his youth, turned large eyes which were filled with agony upon his questioners. Lambert was already internationally famous for his unique and astounding experiments in the realm of sound and rhythm. He'd been endowed by one of the great electrical companies to do original work, and his laboratory, in which he lived, was situated in a large tract of isolated woodland some 40 miles from New York City. It was necessary for the success of his work that as few disturbing noises as possible be made in the neighborhood. Many of his experiments with sound and etheric waves required absolute quiet and freedom from interrupting noises. The delicate nature of some of the machines he used would not tolerate so much as the footsteps of a man within 100 yards, and a passing car would have disrupted them entirely. Lambert was terribly nervous. He trembled under the gaze of the stern detective, come with several colleagues from a neighboring town at the call of Madge Crawford's frightened family. The girl, whose picture stood on a working table nearby, looked at them from the photograph as a beautiful young woman of 25, light of hair with large eyes and a lovely face. Detective Phillips pointed dramatically at the likeness of the missing girl. "Can you, he said, look at her there and deny you loved her? And if she did not love you in return, then we have a motive for what you've done. Jealousy. Come, tell us what you've done with her. Our men will find her anyway. They're searching the cellar for her now. You can't hope to keep her alive, and if she's dead—" Lambert uttered a cry of despair, and put his face in his long fingers. Don't say she's dead." "Ah, then you did love her," exclaimed Phillips triumphantly, and exchanged glances with his companions. "Of course I love her, and she loved me in return. We were secretly engaged and were to be married when we'd finished these extremely important experiments. It is infamous, though, to accuse me of having killed her. If I have done so, then it was no fault of mine." "Ah, then you did kill her." No, I cannot believe she's really gone." "Why did you evade her parents' inquiries?" "Because, well, I've been trying to bring her to rematerialize her." "You mean bring her back to life?" "Yes." "Couldn't a doctor do that better than you? If she is hidden about here somewhere?" asked Phillips gravely. No, you don't understand. She cannot be seen. She's dematerialized. Oh, go away. I'm the only man, save possibly my friend Dr. Morgan, who can help her now. Morgan, well, I've thought of calling him.
but I've been working every instant to get the right combination. Just go away, for God's sake."
"We can't go away till we've found out Miss Crawford's fate," said Phillips patiently.
Another sleuth entered the immense laboratory. He made his way through the myriad strange machines, a weird collection of xylophones, gongs, stone slabs cut in peculiar patterns to produce odd rhythmic sounds, electric apparatus of all sorts. Near Phillips was a plate some feet square, of heavy metal raised from the floor on poles of a different substance. About the ceiling were studs thickly set of the same sort of metal as was the big plate. One of the sleuths tapped his forehead, pointing to Lambert as the latter nervously lit a cigarette. The newcomer reported to Phillips. He held in his hand 2 or 3 sheets of paper on which something was written.
"The only other person here is a deaf mute," said the sleuth to Phillips, his superior. "I got his story. He writes that he takes care of things, cooks their meals, and so on. And he writes further that he thinks the woman and this guy Lambert were in love with each other. He has no idea where she's gone to, though. Here, you read it."
Phillips took the sheets and continued.
"Yesterday morning, about 10 o'clock, I was passing the door of the laboratory on my way to make up Professor Lambert's bed. Suddenly I noticed this queer, shimmering, greenish-blue light streaming down from the walls and ceiling of the laboratory. I was right outside the place, and though I cannot hear anything, I was knocked down, and I twisted and wriggled around like a snake. It felt like something with 1,000 little paws, but with great strength was pushing me every way. When there was a lull and the light had stopped for a few moments, I staggered to my feet and ran madly for my own quarters, scared out of my head. As I went by the kitchen, I saw Miss Crawford at the sink there, filling some vases and arranging flowers, as she usually did every morning. Well, if she called to me, I didn't hear or notice her lips moving, but I believe she came to the door. I was going to quit when I recovered myself, angry at what had occurred, but then I began to feel ashamed for being such a baby, for Professor Lambert had been very good to me. About 15 minutes later I went to my room, and I was able to return to the kitchen. Miss Crawford was not there, though the flowers and vases were. Then, as I started to work, still a little alarmed, Professor Lambert came rushing into the kitchen, an expression of terror on his face. His mouth was open. I think he was calling. Then he ran out, back to the laboratory, and I've not seen Miss Madge since. Professor Lambert's been almost continuously in the workroom since then, and I keep away from it because I was afraid. 2 more members of Phillips's squad broke into the laboratory and came toward the chief. They'd been working at physical labor, for they were still perspiring, and one regarded his hands with a rueful expression. "Any luck?"
asked Phillips eagerly. "No, boss. We've been all over the place, and we dug every spot we could to get earth in the cellar. Most of it's 3-inch concrete, without a sign of a break."
"Did you look in the furnace?"
We looked there first thing. She ain't there." There were several more closets in the laboratory, and Phillips opened all of them and inspected them. As he moved near the big plate, Lambert uttered a cry of warning. "Don't disturb that. Don't touch anything near it."
All right,
said Phillips testily. The skeptical sleuths had classified Lambert as a nut, and were practically sure he'd done away with Madge Crawford because she wouldn't marry him. Still, they needed better evidence than their mere beliefs. She was no corpus delicti, for instance. "Gentlemen," said Lambert at last, controlling his emotions with a great effort, "I will admit to you that I am in trepidation and a state of mental torture as to Miss Crawford's fate. You are delaying matters, keeping me from my work." "He thinks about work when the girl he claims he loves has disappeared," said Doherty in a loud whisper to Phillips. Doherty was one of the sleuths who'd been digging in the cellar, and the hard work had made his temper short. "You must help us find Miss Crawford before we can let you alone," said Phillips. "Can't you understand that you're under grave suspicion of having injured her, hidden her away? Well, this is a serious matter, Professor Lambert. Your experiments can wait." "This one cannot," shouted Lambert, shaking his fists. "You are fools." "Steady now," said Doherty. "Perhaps you'd better come with us to the district attorney's office," went on Phillips.
There you may come to your senses and realize the futility of trying to cover up your crime, if you've committed one. If you have not, then why don't you tell us where Miss Crawford is?"
"Because I don't know myself," replied Lambert. "But you can't take me away from here. I beg of you, gentlemen, allow me a little more time. I must have it."
But Phillips shook his head. "Not unless you tell us logically what's occurred," he said.
"Then I must, though I do not think you'll comprehend or even believe me. Briefly, it is this. Yesterday morning I was working on the final series of experiments with a new type of harmonic overtones, plus a new type of sinusoidal current, which I'd arranged with a series of selenium cells. When I finally threw the switch, remember, I was many weeks preparing this apparatus, and had just put the final touches on early that morning. Well, there was a sound such as never heard before by human ears, an indescribable sound, terrifying and mysterious. Also, there was a fierce, devouring verdict of blue light, and this came from the plates and studs, you see, but so great was its strength that it got out of control and leaped about the room like a live thing. Well, for some moments, while it increased in intensity as I raised the power of the current by means of the switch I had in my hand, I watched and listened in fascination. My instruments had ceased to record, though they're the most delicate ever invented and can handle almost anything which man can even surmise. Well, the perspiration was pouring from Lambert's face as he recounted his story. The detectives listened, comprehending but a little of the meaning of the scientist's words. "What has this to do with Miss Crawford?" asked Doherty impatiently. Phillips held up his hand to silence the other sleuth. "Let him finish," he ordered. "Go on, Professor." "All the sensations which I was undergoing became unendurable," went on Lambert in a low, hoarse voice. "I was forced to cry out in pain and confusion. Well, Miss Crawford evidently heard my call, for a few moments later, just as the terrific unknown force reached its apex, she dashed into the laboratory and stepped across the plate you see there. I was powerless, though I shut off the current by a superhuman effort. Well, she was gone." And Lambert put his face in his hands, and a sob shook his broad shoulders. "Gone?" repeated Phillips. "What do you mean, gone?" "She disappeared before my very eyes," said the professor shakily, torn into nothingness by the fierce force of the current or sound. "Since then, I've been trying to reproduce the conditions of the experiment, for I wish to bring her back. If I cannot do so, then I want to join her wherever she's gone. I love her. I know now that I cannot possibly live without her. Will you please leave me alone now, so that I can continue?" Doherty laughed derisively. "What a story," he jeered. "Keep quiet, Doherty," ordered Phillips. "Now, Professor Lambert, your explanation of Miss Crawford's disappearance does not sound logical to us, but still we're willing to give you every chance to bring her back, if what you say is true. We cannot leave you entirely alone, because you might try to escape or you might carry out your threat of suicide, and therefore I'm going to sit over there in the corner, quietly, where I can watch you but will not interfere with your work. We'll give you until midnight to prove your story. Then you must go with us to the district attorney. Do you agree to that?" Lambert nodded eagerly. "I agree. Let me work in peace, and if I do not succeed, then you may take me anywhere you wish, if you can," he added in an undertone. Doherty and the others, at Phillips' orders, filed from the laboratory. "One more thing, Professor," said Phillips, when they were alone and the professor was preparing to work. "How do you explain the fact, if your story is true, that Miss Crawford was killed and made to disappear, while you yourself, close by, were uninjured?" "Do you see these garments?" asked Lambert, indicating some black clothes which lay on a bench nearby. "They insulated me from the current and partially protected me from the sound. Although the force was very great enough to penetrate my insulation, it was handicapped in my case because of these garments." "I see. Well, you may go on." Phillips moved in the chair he'd taken from time to time. He could hear the noises of his men, still searching the premises for Madge Crawford, and Professor Lambert heard them too. "Will you tell your man to be quiet?" he cried at last. There were dark circles under Lambert's eyes. He was working in a state of feverish anxiety. When the girl he loved had dematerialized from under his eyes, panic had seized him. He'd ripped away wires to break the current and lost the thread of his experiment, so that he could not reproduce it exactly without much labor. The scientist put on the black robes, and Phillips wished he too had some protective armor, even though he did believe that Lambert had told them a parcel of lies. Oh, the deaf-mute story was not too reassuring. Phillips warned his companions to be more quiet, and he himself sat quite still. Lambert knew that the sleuths thought he was stark mad. He was aware of the fact that he had but a few hours in which to save the girl who had come at his cry to help him, who had loved him and whom he loved, only to be torn into some place unknown by the forces which were released in his experiment. And he knew he would rather die with her than live without her. He labored feverishly, though he tried to keep his brain calm in order to win. His notes helped him up to a certain point, but when he'd made the final touches, he'd not had time to bring the data up to that moment, being eager to test out his apparatus. It was while testing that the awful event had occurred, and he'd seen Madge Crawford disappear before his very eyes. Her eyes, large and frightened, burned in his mind. The deaf-mute, Felix, a small, spare man of about 50, sent the professor some food and coffee through one of the sleuths. Lambert swallowed the coffee, but waved away the rest impatiently. Phillips, watching his suspect constantly, was served a light supper at the end of the afternoon. There seemed to be 1,000,000 wires to be touched, tested, and various strange apparatus. Several times later on in the evening, Lambert threw the big switch with an air of expectancy, but little happened. Then Lambert would go to work again, testing, adjusting this and that until Phillips swore under his breath. "Only an hour more, Professor," said Phillips, who was bored to death and cramped from trying to obey the professor's orders to keep still. A circle of cigarette ends surrounded the sleuth. "Only an hour," agreed Lambert. "Will you please be quiet, my man? This is a matter of my fiancée's life or death." Phillips was somewhat disgruntled, for he felt he'd done Lambert quite a favor in allowing him to remain in the laboratory for so long to prove his story. "God, I wish Dr. Morgan were here. I ought to have sent for him, I suppose," said Lambert a few minutes later. "Will you allow me to get him? I cannot seem to perfect this last stage." "Oh, no time now," declared Phillips. "I said till midnight." It was obvious to Lambert that the detective had become certain during the course of the evening that the scientist was mad. The ceaseless fiddling and the lack of results or even spectacular sights had convinced Phillips that he was dealing with a crank. "Oh, I think I have it now," said Lambert coolly. "What?" asked Phillips. "The original combination. I'd forgotten one detail in the excitement, and this threw me off. Now I believe I will succeed in one way or another. Now, I warn you, be careful. I'm about to release forces which may get out of my control." "Well, now, don't get reckless," begged Phillips nervously. The array of machines had impressed him, even if Lambert did seem a fool. "You insist upon remaining, so it's your own risk," said Lambert coolly. Lambert, in those strange robes, was a bizarre figure. The hood was thrown back, exposing his pale, black-bearded face, the wan eyes with dark circles under them and the twitching lips. "If you find yourself leaving this vale of tears," went on the scientist, ironically to the sleuth, "you will at least have the comfort of realizing that, as the sound force disintegrates your mortal form, you are among the first men to be attuned to the vibrations of the unknown sound world. All matter is vibration. That's been proven. A building of bricks, if shaken in the right manner, falls into its component parts. A bridge, crossed by soldiers in certain rhythmic time, is torn from its moorings. A tuning fork, receiving the sound vibrations from one of a similar size and shape, begins to vibrate in turn. Now, these are homely analogies, but applied to the less familiar sound vibrations which make up our atomic world, they may help you to understand how the terrific forces I have discovered can disintegrate flesh." The scientist looked then inquiringly at Phillips. As the sleuth did not move, but sat with folded arms, Lambert shrugged and said, "Right, I'm ready." Lambert raised his hood, and Philip said, in a spirit of bravado, "You can't scare me out of here." "Well, here goes a switch," cried Lambert. He made the contact, as he had before. He stood for a moment, and this time the current gained force. The experimenter pushed his lever all the way over. A terrible greenish-blue light suddenly illuminated the laboratory, and through the air there came sound vibrations which seemed to tear at Phillips's body. He found himself on the floor, knocked from his chair, and he writhed this way and that, speechless, suffering a torment of agony. His whole flesh seemed to tremble in unison with the waves which emanated from the machines which Lambert manipulated. After what seemed hours to the suffering sleuth, the force diminished, and soon Phillips was able to rise. Trembling, the detective cursed and yelled for help in a high-pitched voice. Lambert had thrown back his hood and was rocking to and fro in agony. "Madge, Madge," he cried. "What have I done? Come back to me, come back!" Doherty and the others came running in at their chief's shouts. "Arrest them," ordered Phillips shakily. "I've taken enough of this nonsense." The detective started for Lambert. He saw them coming and swiftly threw off the protective garments he wore. "Stand back," he cried, and threw the switch all the way over. The verditer green light smashed through the air, and the queer sound sensations smacked and tore at them. Doherty, who had drawn a revolver when he was answering Phillips's cries, fired the gun into the air, and the report seemed to battle with the vibrating ether. Lambert, as he threw the switch, leaped forward and landed on the metal plate under the ceiling studs, in the very center of the awful disturbance and unprotected from its force. For a few moments Lambert felt racking pain, as though something were tearing at his flesh, separating the very atoms. The scientist saw the wriggling figures of the sleuths in various strange positions, but his impressions were confused. His head whirled round and round. He swayed to and fro, and finally he thought he'd fallen down, or rather that he'd melted, as a lump of sugar dissolves in water. "He's gone. Gone!" In the heart of nothingness was Lambert, his body torn and racked in a shrieking chaos of sound and a blinding glare of iridescent light, which seemed too much to bear. His last conscious thought was a prayer that, having failed to bring back his sweetheart, Madge Crawford, he was undergoing a step toward the same destination to which he'd sent her. John Lambert came to with a shudder, but it was not a mortal shudder. He could sense no body, had no sense of being confined by matter. He was in a strange, chilly place, a twilight region, limitless, without dimensions. Yet he could feel something, in an impersonal way, vaguely indifferent. He had no pain now. But he was moving somehow, and he had one impelling desire, and that was to discover Madge Crawford. Perhaps it was this thought which directed his movements. Intent upon finding the girl, if she was indeed in this same strange world that he was, he didn't notice for some time, how long he had no way of telling, that there were other beings which tried to impede his progress. But as he grew more accustomed to the unfamiliar sensations he was undergoing, he found his path blocked again and again by queer beings. They were living, without doubt, and had intelligence, and evinced hostility towards him. But they were shapeless as amoebas. He heard them in a sort of soundless whisper, and could see them without the use of his eyes. And he shuddered, though he could feel no body in which he might be confined. Still, when he pinched viciously with invisible fingers at the spot where his face should have been, a twinge of pain registered on the vague consciousness which appeared to be all there was of him. He was not sure of his substance, though he could evidently experience human sensations with his amorphous body. He didn't know whether he could see, yet he was dodging this way and that, as the beings who occupied this world tried to stop him. They gave him the impressions of grey shapes, and in coppery shadows things gleamed and closed in on him. He seemed to hear a cry, and he knew that he was receiving a call for help from Madge Crawford. He tried to run, pushed determinedly toward the spot, impelled by his love for this girl. Now, as he hurried, he occasionally was stopped short by collision with the formless shapes which were all about him. He was hampered by them, for they followed him, making a sound like wind heard in a dream. Whatever medium he was in was evidently thickly inhabited by these hostile beings, who claimed this world as their own. Though he couldn't actually feel the medium, he could sense that it was heavy. He leaped and ran, fighting his way through the increasing hosts, and the roar of their voice impressions increased in his consciousness. Yet there seemed to be nothing tangible save vagueness. He felt he was in a blind spot in space, a place of no dimensions, no time, where beings are bored by nature, things which had never developed any dimensional laws, existed. The cry for help struck him, with more force this time. Lambert, whatever form he was in, realized that he was close to the end of his journey to Madge Crawford. He tried to speak, and had the impression that he'd said something reassuring. He then bumped into some vibrational being which he knew was Madge. His ears could not hear, nor could his flesh feel, but his whole form, or cerebrum, sensed he held the woman he loved in his arms. And she was speaking to him, in accents of fear, begging him to save her. John, you've come at last. Oh, they've been torturing me terribly. Save me. Darling Madge, I'll do everything I can. Now I've found you, and we're together. We'll never part. Can you hear me? I know what you're thinking, and what you wish to say. I can't exactly hear. It all seems vague and impossible, yet I can suffer. They've been hitting me with something which makes me shudder and shake. They're at it again. Lambert felt these sensations now, which the girl had made known to him. He felt crowded by grey beings, and his existence was troubled by spasms of pain impressions. He knew Madge was crying out, too. He couldn't comprehend the attacks or guess their meaning, but this situation was unendurable. Anger shook him, and he began to fight, furiously but vaguely. They were closely hemmed in, but when Lambert began to strike out with his hands and legs, the beings gave way a little. The scientist tried to shout, and though he could actually hear nothing, the result was gratifying. The formless creatures seemed to scatter and draw back in confusion as he yelled his defiance. "Oh, they hate that," Madge said to him. "I've screamed myself hoarse, and that's why they've not killed me, if I can be killed." "I do not believe we can, but they can torture us," replied Lambert. "It's an everlasting half-life or quarter-life, and these creatures who call this hell's dimension home have nothing but hatred for us in their consciousness. The inhabitants of this imperfect world are closed in once again, and the sharp instruments of torture they used were being thrust into the invisible bodies of the two humans." Each time Lambert was unable to restrain his cries, for it seemed that he was being torn to pieces by vibrations. He yelled until he could not speak above a whisper, or at least until the impressions of speech he gave forth did not trouble the beings. The two humans, still bound to some extent by their mortal beliefs, were chivied to and fro, and struck and bullied. The creatures seemed to delight in this sport. The two felt they could not die, and yet they could suffer terribly. Would this go on through eternity? Was there no release? Now they were trying to tear Madge away from him. She was fighting them, and Lambert, in a frenzy of rage, made a determined effort to get away with the girl from their tormentors. They retreated before his onslaughts. Drawing Madge after him, Lambert put down his head, or believed he was doing so, and ran as fast as he could at the beings. He bumped into some invisible forms and was slowed in his rush, but he shouted and flailed about with his arms and tried to kick. Madge helped by screaming and striking out. They made some distance in this way, or so they thought, and the horrid creatures gave way before them. All about them was the coppery sensation of the medium in which they moved. Lambert, as he became more used to the form he was inhabiting, began to think he could discern dreadful eyes which stared unblinkingly at the couple. He fought on, and believed they'd come to a spot where the beings did not molest them, though they still sensed the things glaring at them. Were they on some invisible eminence above the reach of these queer creatures? Well, we might as well stop here. If we try to go further, we may come to a worse place, said Lambert. And so they rested there, in temporary peace, together at last. I seem to be happy now, said Madge, clinging close. I feared I would never see you again. Oh, John, dear. I ran to you when you called out that day, and when I crossed the plate, I was torn and racked and knocked down. When I next experienced sensation, it was in this terrible form. I'm becoming more used to it, but I kept crying out for you. The beings, as soon as they discovered my presence, began to torment me. More and more have been collecting, and I have a sensation of seeing them as horrible, revolting beasts. Oh, John, I don't think I could have stood it much longer if you hadn't come to me. They would drive me on and on and on, ceaselessly torturing me. Ah, curse them, said Lambert. I wish I could really get hold of some of them. Or perhaps, Madge, I will be able to think of some escape for us from this hell's dimension. Yes, darling. I couldn't bear to think we're eternally damned to exist among these beings, hurt by them and unable to get away. Oh, how I wish we were back in the laboratory at the tea table. How happy we were there. And we will be again, Madge. Well, Lambert was far from feeling hopeful, but he tried to encourage the girl into thinking they might get away. However, he was unable to dissimulate, and she felt his anguish for her safety. But I know now that you love me. I can feel it stronger than ever before, John. It seems like a great rock to which I can always cling. Your love. It protects me from the hatred that these beasts pour out against us. Since they had no sense of time, they couldn't tell how long they were allowed to remain unmolested. But in each other's company they were happy, though each one was afraid for the safety of the other. And they spoke of the mortal life they'd lived, and their love. They felt no need for food or water. They just clung together in a dimensionless universe, held up by love. Well, the lull came to an end at last. There was no change in the coppery vagueness about them which they sensed as the surrounding ether, but all was changeless, boundless. Lambert, close to Madge Crawford, felt that they were about to be attacked. He had swift, temporary impressions of seeing saucer-like, unblinking eyes, and then hordes of bizarre inhabitants starting to climb up to their perch. For a short while, Lambert and Madge fought them off, thrusting at them, seeming to push them backward down this untangible slope. The cries which the dematerialized humans uttered also helped to hold the leaders of the attacking army partially in check, but the vast number of beings swept forward. The thrusts of the torture fields they emanated became more and more racking as the two unfortunates shuddered in horror and pain. The power to demonstrate loud noise was evidently impossible to the creatures, for their sounds came to Madge Crawford and John Lambert as long, drawn-out, almost unbearable squeaks, mouse-like in character. Perhaps they'd never had the faculty of speech, since they did not need it to communicate with one another. Perhaps they realized that the racket they could make would hurt them as much as it did their enemies. Lambert, Madge clinging to him, was forced backward down the slope, and the beings had the advantage of height. He could not again reach the eminence, but the way behind seemed to clear quickly enough, though thrusts were made at him innumerable times with the torture fields, and the hordes pushed them backward, ever back. They were forced on for some distance, and as they retreated the way became easier, and fewer of the beings impeded the channel along which they moved, though in front of them and on all sides, above, beneath, and below, they were pressed by the hordes. "They're forcing us to some place they want us to go," said Lambert desperately. "We can't do anything more," replied the girl. Lambert felt her quiet confidence in him, and that, as long as they were together, all was well. "Maybe they can kill us somehow," he said, and now Lambert felt the way was clear to the rear. There was a sudden rush of the creatures, and needle-like fields were impelled viciously into the spaces the two humans occupied. Madge cried out in pain, and Lambert shouted. The throng drew away from them as suddenly as it had surged forward, and in an instant later the pair, clinging together, felt like they were falling, falling. Are you all right, Madge? Yes, John. But he knew she was suffering. How long they fell he did not know, but they stopped at last. No sooner had they come to rest than they were assailed with sensations of pain which made both cry out in anguish. There, in the spot where they'd been thrust by the hordes, they felt that there was some terrific vibration which racked and tore at their invisible forms continuously, sending them into spasms of sharp misery. They were both forced to give vent to their feelings by loud cries, but they could not command their movements any longer. When they tried to get away, their limbs moved, but they felt that they remained in the same spot. The pain shook every fraction of their souls. "We're in some pit of hell, into which they've thrown us, John," gasped Madge. He knew she was shivering with the torture of that great vibration from which there was no escape, that they were in a prison pit of hell's dimension. "John, I'm dying." But he was powerless to help her, because he suffered as much as she. Yet there was no weakening of his sensations. He was in as much torture as he'd been at the start. He knew that they could not die and could never escape from this misery of hell. Their cries seemed to disturb the vacuum about them. Lambert, shivering and shaking with pain, was aware that great eyes, similar to those which they thought they saw above, were now upon them. Squeaks were impressed upon him, squeaks which expressed disapprobation. There were some of the beings in the pit with them. Madge knew they were there too, and she cried out in terror, "Will they add to our misery?" But the creatures in the vacuum were pinned to the spots they occupied, as were Madge and Lambert. From their squeaks it was evident they suffered too, and were fellow prisoners of the mortals. "Probably the cries we made disturbed them," said Lambert. "Vibrations to which we and they are not attuned are torture to the form we are in. Evidently the inhabitants of this hell world punish offenders by condemning them to this eternal torture." "Why? Why do they treat us so?" "Perhaps we jarred upon them, hurt them, because we're not of their kind exactly," said Lambert. "Perhaps it's just their natural hatred of us as strangers." They did not grow used to the terrible eternity of torments. No, if anything, it grew worse as it went on. Still, they could visualize no end to the existence to which they were bound. Throbs of awful intensity rent them, tore them apart myriad times, yet they still felt as keenly as before and suffered just as much. There was no death for them, no release from the intangible world in which they were. Their fellow prisoners squeaked at them, as though imploring them not to add to the agony by uttering discordant cries. But it was impossible for Madge to keep quiet, and Lambert shouted in anguish from time to time. There seemed to be no end to it. And yet, after what was eternity to the sufferers, Madge spoke hopefully. "Darling John, I fear I'm really going to die. I'm growing weaker. I can feel the pain very little now. It's all vague and it's getting less real to me. Goodbye, sweetheart. I love you and I always will." Lambert uttered a strangled cry. No, don't leave me, Madge." He clung to her, yet she was becoming extremely intangible to him. She was melting away from his embrace, and Lambert felt that he too was weaker, even less real than he had been. He hoped that, if it was the end, that they would go together. Desperately he tried to hold her with him, but he had little ability to do so. The torture was still racking his consciousness, but was becoming more dreamlike. And there was a terrific snap, suddenly, and Lambert lost all consciousness. What? Lambert, opening his eyes, felt his body writhing about, and experienced pain that was mortal. A bluish-green light dazzled his pupils and made him blink. Something cut into his flesh, and Lambert rolled about, trying to escape. He bumped into something soft. He clung to this form and knew he was holding on to a human being. Then the light died out, and in its stead was the yellow, normal glow of the electric lights. Weak, famished, almost dead of thirst, Lambert looked about him at the familiar sights of his laboratory. He was lying on the floor, close by the metal plate, and at his side, unconscious but still alive, judging by her rising and falling breast, was Madge Crawford. Someone bent over him and pressed a glass of water against his lips. He drank, watching, while a mortal whom Lambert at last realized was Detective Phillips bathed Madge Crawford's temples with water from a pitcher and forced a little between her pale, drawn lips. Lambert tried to rise, but he was too weak and required assistance. He was dazed still, and they sat him down in a chair and allowed him to come to. He shuddered from time to time, for he still thought he could feel the torture which he'd been undergoing. But he was worried about Madge and watched anxiously as Phillips, assisted by another man, worked over the girl. At last Madge stirred and moaned faintly. They lifted her to a bench where they gently restored her to full consciousness. When she could sit up, she at once cried out for Lambert. The scientist had recovered enough to rise to his feet and stagger toward her. "Here I am, darling. Here I am," he said. "John, we're alive. We're back in the laboratory."
"Ah, Lambert. Glad to see you."
A heavy voice spoke, and Lambert for the first time noticed the black-clad figure which stood to one side, near the switchboard, hidden by a large piece of apparatus. "Dr. Morgan!" cried Lambert. Alphys Morgan, the renowned physicist, came forward calmly, with outstretched hand.
"So you realize your great ambition, hey?" he said curiously. "But where would you be if I had not been able to bring you back?"
"In hell. Or hell's dimension, anyway," said Lambert. And he went to Madge, took her in his arms. "Darling, we're safe. Morgan has managed to rematerialize us. We'll never again be cast into the void in this way. I shall now destroy the apparatus and all my notes." Doherty, who'd been out of the room on some errand, came back to the laboratory. He shouted when he saw Lambert standing before him. "You got him!" he cried. "Hey, where was he hiding?" His eyes fell upon Madge Crawford then, and he exclaimed in satisfaction.
"Ah, you found her, eh?"
"No," said Phillips. "They came back. They suddenly appeared out of nothing, Doherty."
"Ah, don't kid me," growled Doherty. "They were hiding in the closet somewhere. Maybe they can fool you guys, but not me."
Lambert spoke to Phillips. "Oh, I'm starving. I think Miss Crawford must be too. Will you tell Felix to bring us some food? Plenty of it." One of the sleuths went to the kitchen to give the order, and then Lambert turned to Morgan. "How did you manage to bring us back?" he asked.
Well, Morgan shrugged. "It's all guesswork at the last. I first could check the apparatus by your notes, and this took some time. You know you've written me in detail about what you were working on, so when I was summoned by Detective Phillips, who said you'd mentioned my name to him as the only one who could help, I could make a good conjecture as to what had occurred. I heard the stories of all concerned and realized that you must have dematerialized Miss Crawford by mistake, and then, unable to bring her back, had followed yourself. Well, I put on your insulation outfit and went to work. I've not left here for a moment, but have snatched an hour or two of sleep from time to time. Detective Phillips has been very good and helpful. Well, finally I had everything in shape, but I reversed the apparatus in vital spots and tried each combination until, suddenly, a few minutes ago, you were rematerialized. It was a desperate chance, but I was forced to take it in an endeavor to save you." Lambert held out his hand to his friend. "I can never thank you enough," he said gratefully. "You saved us from a horrible fate. You speak as though we'd been gone for a long while. Was it many hours?" "Hours," repeated Morgan, his lips parting under his black beard. "Man, it was 8 days. You've been gone since a week ago last night." Lambert turned to Phillips. "Look, I must ask you not to release this story to the newspapers," he begged. Phillips smiled and turned up his hands in a gesture of frank wonder. "Professor Lambert," he said, "I can't believe what I've seen myself.
If I told such a yarn to the reporters, they'd never forget it. They'd kick me out of the department. They were just hiding in the closet, growled Doherty. Come on, we've wasted too much time on this job already. Just a couple of nuts, I say. The sleuths, after Phillips had shaken hands with Lambert, left the laboratory. Morgan, a large man of middle age, joined them in a meal which Felix served to the three on a folding table brought in for the purpose. Felix was terribly glad to see Madge and Lambert again, and manifested his joy by many bobs and leaps as he waited upon them. A grin spread across his face from ear to ear. Morgan asked innumerable questions. They described as best what they could recall of the strange dominion in which they'd been, and the physicist listened intently. Well, it is some hell's dimension, as you call it, he said at last. Where it is, or exactly, I cannot say, said Lambert, and I surely have no desire to return to that world of hate. Madge, happy now, smiled at him, and he leaned over and kissed her tenderly. We've come from hell together, said Lambert, and now we're in heaven. The Destroyer. The pencil in the hand of Alan Parker refused to obey his will. Some strange unseen force pushed his will aside and took possession of the pencil point, so that what he drew was not his own. It was the same when he turned from drawing board to typewriter. The sentences were not of his framing. The ideas were utterly foreign to him. This was the first hint he received of the fate that was drawing in like night upon him and his beautiful wife. Parker, a young writer of growing reputation who illustrated his own work, was making a series of pencil sketches for a romance partly finished. The story was as joyous and elusive as sunlight, and until today his sketches had held the same quality. Now he couldn't tap the reservoir from which he'd taken the wind-blown hair and smiling eyes of Madeline, his heroine. When he drew or wrote, he seemed to be submerged in the dark waters of a measureless evil pit. The face that mocked him from the paper was stamped with a world-old knowledge of forbidden things. Parker dropped his pencil and leaned back, tortured. He and his wife, Betty, had taken this house in Pine Hills, a small and extremely quiet suburban village, solely for the purpose of concentration on the book which was to be the most important work he'd ever done. He went to the door of the room that he used for a studio and called out, "Betty, can you come here a moment, please?" There was a patter of running feet on the stairs, and then a girl of 20 or thereabouts came into the room. Any man would have said she was a blessing. Her hair was yellow like ripe corn, and her vivid blue eyes held depth and character and charm. Look, exclaimed Parker. What do you think of this stuff? For a moment there was silence. Then Alan Parker saw something he'd never seen before in his wife's face, for him or for his work. A look of complete disgust. Well, I wouldn't have believed you capable of doing anything so horrid, she said coldly. How could you? I don't know. His arms, which had been ready to take her to him for comfort, dropped. The work has been difficult lately. It's as though something was pulling at my mind. But not like this. I mean, it isn't me. Well, it must be you, since it came out of you. She turned away and moved restlessly to one of the windows. Look through me, muttered Parker. Ideas come through me. You'll have to do something. Yeah, what? I don't know what to do. Why not go see that new doctor? Asked Betty over her shoulder. You know, Dr. Friedrich von Stein. Von Stein? Repeated Parker vaguely. Don't know him. Anyhow, I don't need a doctor. What in the world made you think of that? Nothing, except I can see his house from here. He's taken what they call the old Reynolds place, you know, opposite the church. We looked at it and thought it was too large for us. Oh, he's made a lot of alterations. Yeah. Parker had placed the newcomer more recent than himself.
I had an idea that he was a doctor of philosophy, though, not medicine.
Oh, he has half a dozen degrees, they say. Certainly he's a stunning-looking man. I saw him on the streets.
Oh, maybe he doesn't practice.
The artist was gazing, baffled and sick at heart, upon what he'd wrought. And what could he do, unless it's my liver? Well, he might be a psychoanalyst or something like that, she replied slowly. Yeah, but why the wild interest in this particular doctor? Parker got up and looked at her. He felt irritable and was ashamed of it. Only for your work, said Betty. A faint pink touched her cheeks. Alan Parker had a sudden feeling of certainty that his wife was lying to him. To one who knew the Parkers, it would have been equally impossible to think of Betty as lying, or of her husband as believing such a thing. And Parker was outraged by his own suspicion. He sprang up and began to pace the floor.
All right, then, he exploded. My work is going to the dogs.
There's an appointment with Cartwright tomorrow to show him these sketches, and the last few chapters I've done.
Look, we'll go now.
If this man can't do anything for me, I'll try somebody else. In 10 minutes, they were walking up the quiet street toward the present home of Dr. Friedrich von Stein. Despite his self-absorption, Parker could not help noticing that his wife had never looked more attractive than she did at this moment. Her colour had deepened. Little wisps of hair curled against her cheeks, and there was a sparkle in her eyes which he knew came only on very particular occasions. Even from the outside, it was apparent that many strange things had been done to the dignified house of Reynolds. A mass of aerials hung above the roof. Some new windows had been cut at the second floor and filled with glass of a peculiar reddish-purple tinge. A residence had been turned into a laboratory, in sharp contrast to the charming houses up and down the street, and the church of grey stone that stood opposite. Beside the door at the main entrance, a modest plate bore the legend, Dr. Friedrich von Stein. Parker pressed the bell. Then he squared his broad shoulders and waited. A very miserable, very likable young man with a finely shaped head and a good set of muscles under his well-cut clothes. Well, he'd brought his sketches, but he was uncomfortable with the portfolio under his arm. It seemed like it was contaminating him. The door opened to reveal a blocky figure of a man in a workman's blouse and overalls. The fellow was pale of eye, tow-headed, and he appeared to be good-natured but of little intelligence. The only remarkable thing about him was a livid welt that ran across one cheek from nose to ear. Beside him a glossy-coated dachshund wagged furiously, after having barked once as a matter of duty.
May we see Dr. von Stein? Asked Parker. Oh, if he's in.
I'll ask Herr Doctor if he is in, replied the man stiffly.
Dummkopf,
roared a voice from inside the house. An instant later, the man and the dog shrank back along the hall, and there appeared in their place one of the most striking personalities Alan Parker had ever seen. Dr. Friedrich von Stein was inches more than 6 feet tall, and he stood perfectly upright, with the unmistakable carriage of a well-drilled soldier. He was big-boned but lean, and every movement was made with military precision. More than any other feature, his eyes impressed Parker. They were steady, penetrating, and absolutely black. But through a thread of grey hair here and there, his well-kept beard and hair were black. He might have been any age from 40 to 60, so deceptive was his appearance.
"Come in, if you please,"
he said before Parker could speak. Von Stein's voice was rich and deep, but with a metallic quality which somehow corresponded with his mechanical smile. Except for the guttural R's, there was hardly a hint of the foreigner in his speech.
"It is Mr. and Mrs. Parker, I believe. I am Dr. von Stein."
He stood aside for them to pass into the hallway, and while they murmured their thanks, he shot a volley of German at the man, whom he called Heinrich. The frightened servant vanished, and the Parkers were taken into a living room furnished carelessly, but in good enough taste. Betty took her place on a couch, to which the doctor led her with a bow. Parker sank into an overstuffed chair not far from the window. "I learned your names because of the beauty of the Madame," said von Stein, as he stood looming above the mantel. Again he bowed. "One could not see her without wishing to know how such a charming woman was called. You are my neighbors from down the street, I believe." "Yes," replied Alan. He wanted to be agreeable, but found it difficult. "And I think Mrs. Parker has developed a great admiration for you. She persuaded me to come here today. Listen, are you by chance a psychoanalyst? I don't even know that you're a doctor of medicine, but I know a very great deal about the human mind," interrupted Dr. von Stein calmly. "I know a great deal about many things. I'm not going to practice medicine here in Pine Hills because I have research work to do, but I will help you if I can. What is your trouble?" The question brought back to Parker the mood of half an hour ago. Almost savagely he snapped the portfolio open and spread out a few of his recent drawings, with some of the earlier ones for comparison. "Look," he cried, "these vicious things are what I'm doing now. I can't help myself. The pencil does not obey me. Apparently I have no emotional control. It's as though my normal ideas were shouldered aside, like people in a crowd. And my writing today was as bad as these illustrations. I'm doing a book. Consider these things carefully, Doctor. They're not obscene, except by inference. They can't be censored. The book will go through the mails, but they are deadly. Look at my heroine in these two pictures. In one she's like violets, and in the other she looks capable of any crime. God, what is she, a vampire, if there is such a thing, a witch? I can almost believe in demonology since I made these last drawings." Parker, in spite of his excitement, tried to read the face of Dr. Friedrich von Stein. He found nothing but the automatic smile upon that mask. Yet it seemed to the artist that this time there was a hint of real pleasure in the curve of his lips. Was it possible that anyone could like those drawings? Parker began to think that he was going insane. "This is most unfortunate for you," rumbled the doctor. "I understand, but I trust that the condition can be remedied if it persists. You, Mr. Parker, and you, Madame, do you understand something of physics, of psychology, or metaphysics?" "Oh, I fear that I am rather ignorant," answered Betty. "Certainly I am in comparison with a man of your attainments." Dr. von Stein once again bowed. He then turned his black eyes upon Parker. "And you, sir, I must adjust my explanation to, what shall I say, to your knowledge of the higher reaches of scientific thought." "Well, I majored in philosophy in college," said Parker hesitatingly. "That was quite a time ago, Herr Doctor. Of course, I've tried to keep up with the conclusions of science, but a writer or a painter doesn't have too much opportunity. He has his own problems to concern him." Yes, indeed." Dr. von Stein was thoughtful. "So, and especially for the benefit of the Madame, I shall speak in terms of the concrete." "Oh, please don't consider me stupid," begged Betty, "but I do want to understand." "Certainly, except that you are not stupid, Madame. I will proceed. Now, both of you, I assume, know something of the radio. Very good. You know that the etheric wave transmits the message, and that it is received and amplified so it is within the range of the human ear. These waves were there when Paleolithic man hunted his meat with a stone-tipped club. But to use them, it was necessary to invent the microphone and a receiving instrument. What I have said you already know, but here is what may startle you. Human thought is an etheric wave of the same essential nature as the radio wave. They're both electrical currents external to man. Thoughts sweep across the human mind as sound currents sweep across the aerials of a radio. God, I told you! Alan Parker turned a triumphant face to his wife. Oh, pardon me, Herr Doctor. I've tried to convince Mrs. Parker that my idea came from outside. Exactly. Dr. Stein took no offense. And the difference between the mind and the radio set is that with the radio you tune in upon whatever you choose, and when you choose. But the mind is under no such control, although it should be. It receives that to which it happens to be open, or that thought which has been intensified and strengthened by having been received and entertained by other minds. Now, in India, they say, 5,000 died of the plague and 50,000 died of fear. Do you both follow me? Well, it was unnecessary to ask. Betty sat on the edge of the couch, intent upon every word. Parker, although more restrained, was equally interested. Moreover, he was delighted to have what he had felt instinctively confirmed, in a way, by a man of science. And Herbert Spencer said, continued the doctor, that no thought, no feeling is ever manifested save as a result of a physical force. This principle will before long be a scientific commonplace, and Huxley predicted that we would arrive at a mechanical equivalent of consciousness. But I will not attempt to bolster my position with authorities. I know, and I can prove what I know. You, Mr. Parker, have been receiving some particularly annoying thoughts, which have been intensified, it may be, by others, or by one other. Human willpower can alter the rate of vibration of the line of force, or etheric wave. So-called good thoughts have a high rate of vibration. Those which are called bad ordinarily have a low rate. Have you, perhaps, an enemy? Well, not that I know of, replied Parker in a low voice. Then it would follow that this is accidental. Good God. Do you mean that, well, do you mean to say that someone could have done this to me maliciously? So far my experiments leave something to be desired, said Dr. von Stein, without answering directly. No doubt you are peculiarly susceptible to thoughts which bear in any way on your work. Oh, but isn't there any help for it? Asked Betty. She was regarding her husband with the eyes of a stranger. I believe I can do something for Mr. Parker. There was a knock on the door then. The doctor bawmed an order to come in. Heinrich, with a dachshund at his heels, entered bearing a tray with a bottle of wine and some slices of heavy fruitcake. He drew out a table and placed the tray on it. Do not bring that dog in when I have guests, said von Stein. He spoke with a gleam of bright white teeth. You know what will happen, Heinrich? Ja, Herr Doctor. I take Hans out. The man was clearly terrified. He gathered the dog into his arms and fairly fled from the room. Dr. von Stein turned with a smile. I have to discipline him, he explained. He's a stupid fellow, but faithful. I can't have ordinary servants about. There are scientific men who would be willing to bribe them for a look at my laboratory. I didn't know such things were done among scholars, said Betty slowly. What I have accomplished means power, madame, exclaimed the doctor. There are jackals in every walk of life. If an unscrupulous man of science got into my laboratory, a physicist, for instance, well, he might find out certain things. Dr. von Stein then returned to his duties as host. He filled their glasses and watched with satisfaction Betty's obvious enjoyment of the cake. A box of mellow Havanas appeared from a cabinet, imported cigarettes from a smoking stand. But Parker, in spite of a liking for good wine and tobacco, was far too much concerned about his work to forget the errand that had brought him there. So, you think, he said when there's an opportunity, that you can help me, Dr. von Stein? I can, replied von Stein firmly. But before attempting anything, I'd like to wait a day or two. The attacking thoughts may become less violent, or your resistance greater. In either of which cases, the condition will fade out. You will either get better or much worse. If you are worse, come to see me again, and I promise that I will do something to help you. Okay, I'll come back, and thank you. Parker felt better and more cheerful than he had since the beginning of this disturbance. Well, few things could make me suffer so much as trouble with my work. That's what I thought, agreed Dr. von Stein. Betty got up. Her husband caught the look in her eyes as they met the bright, black gaze of Dr. von Stein, and he went cold. That look had always been for him alone. Her feet seemed to linger on the way to the door. "Oh, she's wonderful," she breathed as they started down the uneventful street. Well, scientific things never interested me before, but he kind of makes them vital, alive. And yet, said Parker thoughtfully, there's something really strange and uncanny about that man. "Oh, nonsense," exclaimed Betty. "It's because he's a genius. Don't be so small, Alan." Parker gasped and remained silent. He couldn't remember a time when his wife had ever spoken to him in quite that way. They finished the little journey home without speaking again, and Parker went directly to the studio. He sat down with drooping shoulders and considered the mess he'd made of his book. Well, there was nothing to do but to see Cartwright tomorrow and face the music. Dinner that night was a mournful affair. The soft footsteps of the servant going in and out of the dining room, the ticking of the clock, were almost the only sounds. Betty was deep in her own thoughts. Parker was too miserable to talk. He went to bed early and lay staring into the darkness for what seemed like an eternity of slow-moving hours. The tall, deep-voiced clock in the hallway downstairs had just struck 1 when suddenly Parker's room was flooded with light. He sat up, blinking, and saw Betty standing near the bed. Her fingers twisted against one another. Her face was drawn and white. "Alan," she whispered, "I'm afraid." Instantly he was on his feet. His arms went around her, and the yellow head dropped wearily against his shoulder. "Afraid of what?" he cried out. "What is it, sweetheart?" "I don't know." All at once her body stiffened, and she pulled away from him. Then she laughed. "Oh, nonsense. I must have been having a bad dream. It's nothing. Oh, I'm sorry I woke you up, Alan." And she was gone before he could stop her. Or bewildered, he didn't know whether to follow. Better not, he thought. She'd sleep now, and perhaps he would too. But he was worried. Betty was becoming less and less like herself. At last Parker did sleep, to awaken shortly after daylight. He got a quick breakfast and took an early train to New York. When John Cartwright, a shrewd and kindly man, well advanced in years, arrived at his office, Alan Parker was right there waiting for him. Cartwright had shown real affection for the younger man, almost a paternal interest. He beamed as usual, until he sat down with the new drawings. Slowly the smile faded from his face. He went over them twice, 3 times, and then he looked up. "My boy," he said, "did you do these?" "Yes." "Do you know that you're turning a delicate and beautiful romance into a lascivious libel on the human race?" "It's being done," replied Parker in a low voice, "and I can't help myself." "What do you mean by that?" "I mean that when I start to draw Madeline, my hand produces that woman of Babylon. The writing's just as bad. It's full of snaring hints, double meanings. I'll destroy the stuff. I've been to see a psychoanalyst." "Ah," he said thoughtfully. "Perhaps you're tired, Alan. Why not take Betty on a cruise or something? There'll still be time for fall publication. I'm going to try everything possible. I'd rather be dead than to do work like this." When Parker left his friend, he was somewhat encouraged. After the first shock, Cartwright had been inclined to make light of the difficulty, and by the time Alan Parker reached Pine Hills, his stride had the usual swing and snap. He ran up the steps of his house and burst into the living room with a smile. Betty was sitting by one of the windows, her hands lying relaxed in her lap. She turned with a somber face toward her husband, and spoke before he had time to say a word of greeting. "You knew that Cordelia Lyman died a short time ago, didn't you?" "Hey, what's that?" exclaimed Parker, bewildered. "Lyman? Oh, the old lady down the street who left her money to found a home for aged spinsters. What about it?" "But she didn't leave her money to found a home for aged spinsters, Alan. She'd said she was going to do it, but, well, and everyone thought so. Her will was admitted to probate, or whatever they call it, yesterday. She left $500,000, all she had, to Dr. Friedrich von Stein, to be used as he thinks best for the advancement of science." "Good God." Parker stared at her. "Why, I didn't know she knew him. He'd only been here a week or so when she died." "Well, there isn't a flaw in the will, they say. Well, you can imagine that all of Pine Hills is talking." "Well," said Parker philosophically, "well, he's lucky. I hope he does something good with it." "He will," replied Betty with conviction. "He'll do many good things." Parker told her of his interview with Cartwright, but she seemed little interested. He didn't try to work that day, but after he'd put the offending drawings and manuscript out of sight, he wandered, read, smoked, and in the evening persuaded Betty to take a moonlight walk with him. They passed the house of Dr. von Stein, from which came a faint humming that sounded like a dynamo. Across the street the church was alight for some service. Triumphant music drifted to them. The moon hung above the spire, with its cross outlined darkly against the brilliant sky. The windows were great jewels, and Betty drew a deep breath. "Sometimes, Alan," she said, "I feel like praying." "Well, you are a beautiful prayer," whispered Parker. She walked close to him, holding his arm, and repeated softly, "Are not two prayers a perfect strength? And shall I feel afraid?" But that was the end of that mood. By the time they arrived home, Betty was again in that strange, aloof, cold, and slightly hard woman of the past few days. Again, depression settled upon Alan Parker. The next morning, he breakfasted alone and went directly to the studio, without seeing Betty. Sun streamed into the room, and the pencil moved swiftly. For a brief time, Parker thought he was himself again, as Madeline grew upon the block of paper. But by the end, it was terrible. The last few strokes made her grotesque. This time the woman he'd drawn was not merely evil, she was a mocking parody of his heroine. He threw the drawing and pencil across the room. But no real artist can be discouraged, short of death, so he went to work again and labored until lunchtime. The results were no better, although they varied. Now it seemed that some malevolent power was playing with him, torturing him to the accompaniment of devilish laughter. He was haggard, and actually stooped of body when he bathed his face and went down to the dining room. From across the table, Betty regarded him curiously. "Fleming Proctor shot himself last night," she announced calmly. "This morning they found him dead in his office." "Proctor? You don't mean the president of the Pine Hills National Bank?" "Yes." The expression on Betty's face did not change. There was a note saying that he was sorry. It seems he'd made a large loan without security to an unknown person, and the bank examiner was coming today. Proctor said he couldn't help what he did. The note was confused, as though he were trying to tell something and just couldn't. think his mind must have given way, particularly as they can't trace the loan, although the money is undoubtedly gone." "Wait, what? That kind of thing doesn't happen." Parker was stunned. He'd known Fleming Proctor and liked him. They met often at the country club. Oh, Proctor was honest and a fine businessman. "Well, it did happen, Alan." "I'd like to know more about it. That would have been another case for Dr. von Stein to take in hand." "Perhaps," said Betty, in a voice like ice. "But I'm more interested in finding out how soon you're going to return to normal. Frankly, I'm beginning to get bored." Without a word, Parker rose and left the room. Never before had his wife hurt him like this. Doubly sensitive just now, he was suffering alone in the studio when the telephone rang. "Dr. von Stein speaking. Are you better, Mr. Parker?" "Worse. Much worse." "Then come to my house this evening at 9. May I expect you, and alone?" "Yeah." There was much Parker wanted to say, but he choked the words back. "Yeah, I'll be there, and alone." "And I shall be ready for you. Goodbye." Alan Parker hung up the phone. He didn't leave the studio again until evening. As Parker approached the house of Dr. Friedrich von Stein, he saw that the church was lighted as it had been the night before. In a clear sky the moon rode above the spire. He paused to let his glance sweep up and along the beautiful line that ran from earth to the slender cross. That was how he felt. He wanted to rise as that line rose, from cumbering earth to clarity and beauty. He mounted the steps and rang the bell. Dr. von Stein met him, with eyes and teeth agleam in the hallway light. Wearily, Parker stepped inside. His mood of the moment before was now fading. "Go upstairs to my laboratory, if you please," said the doctor. "It is best that I see you there, for it may be that you will need treatment." "Oh, I need something," replied Parker as he went up a long flight of stairs. "I'm in a bad way." Without answer, von Stein led him down a short corridor and held open a door. Alan Parker stepped into a room that bewildered him with its strange contrasts. At a glance he saw that nearly the whole upper floor of the building had been converted into one gigantic room. There was a big stone fireplace where burning driftwood sent up its many tinted flames. Heinrich stood rigidly at attention. Hans, the dachshund, crouched at his feet. When the dog started to meet Parker, a guttural command stopped him. Here there were bearskins on the floor, huge stuffed chairs, footrests, little tables, humidors, pipe racks, and all that one could desire for absolute comfort. 2 German dueling swords were crossed above the mantel. But beyond this corner, everything was different. Parker saw the massed windows of reddish-purple glass. He saw apparatus for which he had no name, as well as some of the ordinary paraphernalia of the chemical laboratory. There was wiring everywhere, and a multitude of lighting fixtures. Utilitarian tables, desks, and chairs were placed about with mathematical precision. There were plates and strips of metal set into the glass-smooth flooring, which was broken by depressions and elevations of unusual form. The most striking thing in the room was a huge copper bowl that hung inverted from the ceiling. In it, and extending down below the rim, was what seemed to be a thick and stationary mist. It looked as though the bowl had been filled with a silver-grey mist and then turned bottom side up, but the cloud did not fall or float away. "I can think and speak best from my desk," von Stein was saying. "Please sit down facing me in the chair which Heinrich will place for you, and then we will talk." Heinrich rolled one of the overstuffed chairs noiselessly to a position about 6 feet from the desk. Parker noticed a long metal strip in the floor between him and the doctor. Just then Hans wriggled forward, and the artist scratched his ears, to be rewarded by a grateful tongue. Again a command from Heinrich brought the dog to heel, but the voice was not so gruff this time. Together they returned to the fireplace. Von Stein let his hands rest upon the desktop. The surface covered with levers, electric switches, push-buttons, and contrivances the nature of which Parker could not guess. The doctor leaned forward. He threw over a switch. The lights in the room became less bright. He pressed a button. The Danse Macabre of Saint-Saëns floated weirdly upon the air, as though the music came from afar off. Is that part of the treatment?" asked Parker with a faint smile. "It's not exactly cheering." "Oh, merely an idiosyncrasy of mine," answered von Stein, showing his teeth. "Before anything is done, I must, in order to aid the receptivity of your mind, go a little further with the explanation of certain things which I mentioned the other day. I promise not to bore you, but more than that, Mr. Parker, I promise that you will be more interested than you have ever been in anything else." It seemed to Parker that there was something sinister in the manner and speech of Dr. von Stein. The dance of death. Did that music have a meaning? Impossible. It was only his sick mind that was allowing such thoughts to come to him. "Well, anything that'll help," he murmured. "You have noticed that copper bowl?" Von Stein did not wait for a reply. "The misty appearance inside and underneath it is given by thousands upon thousands of minute platinum wires. When it is in use, a slight electrical current is passed through it, varying in power according to the rate of vibration needed. That instrument, my dear sir, is a transmitter of thought. I may call it the microphone of the mind. I can tune in on any mind in the world by experimenting up and down the vibration range to determine the susceptibility of the particular person. The human mind does not need an amplifier, as the radio receiving set does. Rather, it acts as its own amplifier. That is, once after having received the thoughts. I invented one, though, just to prove that it could be done. I equipped Heinrich with it, and in half an hour, by suggestion, reduced him to his present state of docile stupidity. I have, Mr. Parker, the means of moving people to do my bidding." Von Stein stopped abruptly, as though for emphasis and to allow his astounding statements to take effect. Parker sat stunned, struggling to grasp all the implications of what he'd just heard. Suddenly they became clear. He saw events in order, and in relation to each other. "So that's how it was with Cordelia Lyman," he cried hoarsely, leaning forward. "And it was you who had that money from Fleming Proctor?" "You are not unintelligent," remarked Dr. von Stein. "Better that science should have the Lyman money than a few old women of no particular use. As for Proctor, he was a fool. I would have protected him." "And my pictures, my book?" "I can cure you, Mr. Parker, if I choose." "And anyone is at the mercy of this man," groaned Parker. "Not absolutely, I'm sorry to say," replied the doctor. "The action of thought on the human consciousness is exactly like that of a sound on the tuning fork. When the mind is tuned right, we'll say for illustration, the lower vibrations are not picked up out of the ether. But as few minds are tuned right, and as all vary from time to time, I am practically omnipotent." You changed the nature of my wife." Parker was getting a hold of himself again and could speak with a degree of calmness. "Well, that's a worse crime than the one you've committed against me directly." "Mr. Parker," said the doctor impressively, "you are in a web. I am the spider, you are the fly. I don't particularly desire to hurt you, but I do want your wife. This is the crux of the matter. She is the woman to share my triumphs, and already I've aroused her interest. Give her up, and you will continue your work as before. Refuse, and you will lose her just as certainly as though you give her to me.
For, my dear sir, you will be insane in less than a month from now. I promise you that.
Alan Parker was not one to indulge in melodrama. For a long moment he sat looking into the black eyes of von Stein. And then he spoke carefully. If my wife of her own will loved you and wanted freedom, I'd let her go. But this is a kind of hypnosis, and it's diabolical.
Who but the devil is the father of magic?
Asked the doctor cheerfully.
Hypnosis is unconsciously based on a scientific principle which I have mastered.
Repeated advertising of a toothbrush or a box of crackers is mild mental suggestion. Hypnosis, if you will.
Now, my dear fellow, be sensible.
No, growled Parker. Von Stein laughed. He moved a lever upon a dial and a sheet of blue flame quivered between them. With another movement of the lever, it vanished.
I could destroy you instantly, he said, and completely, and no one could prove a crime. I shall not do it, though. I have no time to be bothered with investigations. Think of the fate I've promised you. Think, and I have no doubt you will give her up. Never. I won't.
Parker wiped cold drops from his forehead, but the doctor frowned thoughtfully.
I'll intensify her desire to come here tonight, he said. She herself will persuade you.
Parker set his fingers into the arms of his chair as von Stein rose and walked to the copper bowl. He now stood directly under it and put on goggles with shields fitting close to his feet. At the pressure of his foot, a table-like affair rose from the floor in front of him. This, like the desk, was equipped with numerous dials, buttons, and levers.
Von Stein started to manipulate them.
The great cap of copper descended until his head was enveloped by the mist of platinum wires. A faint humming grew in the room, and a tiny bell tinkled.
Ah, the connection is made, murmured von Stein.
He lifted a hand for silence. Then his fingers leaped among the gadgets on the table. After that came a brief period, measured by seconds, of immobility. Then the table sank from view, the copper bowl lifted, and Dr. von Stein went back to his chair.
She will be here shortly, he said. If that does not change your mind.
He then shrugged. Parker knew what that shrug meant. He searched his mind for a plan and found none. Better to die fighting than yield, or risk the vengeance of Friedrich von Stein. If he could get the doctor away from the desk where he controlled the blue-white flame, there might be a chance to do something. Von Stein was by far the larger man, but Parker had been an athlete all of his life. So that mass of copper and platinum, he said tentatively. That'll make you the master of the world?
My brain, my intelligence has made me master of the world,
corrected von Stein proudly.
He was touched in the right spot now. You have not seen it all yet.
He sprang up and went to one of the tables. From his pocket he took a piece of paper and crumpled it into a ball while, with the other hand, he made some electrical connections to a plate of metal set into the surface of the table. Next he placed the wad of paper on the plate. Then, standing at arm's length from the apparatus, he pressed a button. Instantly the paper disappeared behind a screen of the colors of the spectrum, from red to violet. The banded colors were there for a minute fraction of a second, and then there was nothing where the paper had been on the plate. Von Stein smiled as he stepped away from the table.
The electron is formed by the crossing of two lines of force, he said, and the interaction of positive and negative polarity. The electron is a stress in the ether, nothing more, but it is the stuff of which all matter is made. Thought is vibration in one dimension, matter in two. You've just seen me untie the knot. Dissociate the electrons, as you will. In plain language, I have caused matter to vanish utterly. That paper is not burned up. No, it no longer exists in any form. The earth upon which we stand, Parker, can be dissolved like mist before the sun." Appalled as he was at this man who boasted and made good on his terrible boasts, Alan Parker had not forgotten the purpose that was in him. Now was his chance, while von Stein stood smiling triumphantly between the table and desk. Parker shot from his chair with the speed of utter desperation. He feinted and drove a vicious uppercut to the jaw of Dr. Friedrich von Stein. The doctor reeled, but he did not go down. His fists swung. But Parker found him to be no boxer, and beat a tattoo upon his midriff. Von Stein began to slump. But then two thick-muscled arms closed around the artist from behind, and he was lifted clear of the floor. He kicked, tried to turn, but it was useless. The doctor recovered himself, and his eyes blazed in fury. "Put him in the chair, Heinrich," he roared. "For this I will show you what I can do, Herr Parker." At that instant, little Hans, who had been yelping on the edge of the battle, suddenly dashed in. He leaped for the throat of von Stein, and the doctor kicked him brutally. The shriek of agony from Hans loosened the arms of Heinrich, though, and Parker got his footing again. He saw the clumsy serving man spring forward and gather his dog up to his chest. So again, Parker rushed for his enemy. It was clear now that von Stein was cut off from the controls he wanted, and without Heinrich he could no longer master Parker in a fight. For an instant he stood baffled. Then he retreated the length of the room, taking what blows he couldn't beat off. He staggered upon a plate of metal set in the floor, righted himself, and failed in an attempt to catch hold of Parker. Suddenly he bowed in the direction of the distant doorway. Alan turned. It was Betty. She was coming down the room, staring and breathless. "Leben Sie wohl," cried von Stein. "Farewell, madam. I should like to take you with me." A great flash of colours from the spectrum sent Parker reeling back. Dr. Friedrich von Stein had gone the way of the crumpled ball of paper. There was a long moment of silence. Then Alan Parker found his wife in his arms, clinging to him. "Are not two prayers of perfect strength?" she murmured, sobbing gently against his heart.
Well, my dear friends, to badly misquote Homer Simpson, it's that point of time when we're living in a day when I don't know what day it is. It's that weird time between Christmas and New Year when it's just some days, isn't it, really? And one of those is one of those days. Anyway, freezing cold here, probably like minus whatever degrees. Had to drive to Dusseldorf yesterday, drop my son at the airport. Fortunately, there was no traffic on the road, obviously, because it's Christmas Day. Anyway, that's what's going on in my life. That's the height of my excitement. So, shops are closed here. It's quite a serious thing in the Netherlands. So we have Christmas Day and Boxing Day, where pretty much absolutely nothing is open. So no reason to go out and do anything, which is fine by me. Well, I hope you enjoyed that collection of stories. There's ones I did originally 4 or 5 years ago, old classics, but I've got some brand new stuff coming up very, very soon. So lots to look forward to. Well, my dear friends, until the next time, which will be at the weekend, I might continue the story I was doing, the superhero who couldn't save the Earth. Anyway, I think there's definitely a new episode of that coming up very soon. Whether I get to that on Sunday or not, I'm not sure. Anyway, hope you're staying warm. Hope those of you in the Southern Hemisphere are having a lovely summer, apart from you Australians, of course, because you're just kicking your asses in cricket. Anyway, it's sport. What are you going to do? Till next time, my dear friends, just have a lovely time. All right, I'm back again soon. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to this story today. Really means a lot to me and to the author of the story, of course. Well, if you want to know more about me, I'm pretty much everywhere on social media. You can find me on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. You can download my music on SoundCloud. I've got a Patreon if you feel like. Throw me $1 or $2. Very much appreciated. And of course, on Reddit, I have a place where you can leave stories if you want me to read one that you've written. Well, hoping to see you all again very soon. Till then, sweet dreams. Bye-bye.